Chapter 1676. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation 1 Pagoda suppression. The hearts of the people in the South River trembled violently as they looked at the dark clouds above their heads. Their chests were suffocating. The human sovereign had arrived. Was it a sect war? Pairs of eyes followed the dark clouds as they flew away. In the direction of Qilin Taoist Mountain. Today, between Taoism and the Void Strike sect, one side would be wiped out. It's here. On the main peak of Taoism, Sect Master Zhu Biechio sat on the ground as his body flickered with imperial qi. He opened his eyes slightly. Behind him, thousands of disciples from the Tao sect stood densely. As he said that, the disciples immediately became nervous, and their palms were sweating. If they won this war, Taoism would survive. If they lost, Taoism would perish. The ancient Taoism mountain that had stood in the southern border of the East continent for thousands of years finally welcomed the final battle. Disciples in charge of the formation, listen up. Vice Sect Master Bo Shang raised his arm. For a moment, a bright light curtain rose from the ground as the protective peak formation was activated. The formation light radiated and shrouded the entire main peak. At this moment, square formations of disciples stepped out of the Taoism, each led by an elder. There weren't many of them, each team had about 30 people on average, but they were all elite disciples of Taoism. The small teams were independent from each other as they emitted different formation powers. Tao Wu's team was filled with raging flames of the Wei. Shi Lang's team of the Sword Valley was shining with extremely sharp sword light. It was a sword formation. Bo Minghua led the elites of the martial pavilion. The entire team was covered by the yin-yang Tao light. They were about to charge for Taoism. Small formation lights flashed one after another as their fighting spirit seemed to ignite the blood in their hearts. Thousands of people in the Taoism hall moved in unison as their palms landed on their swords. From afar, they saw two armies of cultivators, one from the east and one from the west, slowly approaching from the sky. The crowd was like an ocean. Demon beasts roared and soared in the army formation. The two commanders in front of the two armies were surrounded by the dazzling light of the human sovereign. Finally, they stopped in the sky above the main peak of Taoism Mountain. They were like majestic heavenly court soldiers looking down at the Taoism disciples below. Senior Nierong, how have you been? Zhu Biechio slowly got up and flew into the sky. Light flowed around his body. His eyes fell on a huge chariot of the Void Strike sect. My dear nephew, the actions of the Tao sect in the cemetery have truly disappointed the old man. Now I'm forced to seek justice. On the chariot, an old man with yellow eyebrows wearing a royal robe replied coldly. Nierong, great ancestor Ji Kong, had a seniority that far surpassed that of the Ren Huang of the three sections. He was the oldest living monster, the undisputed number 1 Ren Huang in the Nanjiang region. Ah, Senior Nie, when it comes to fighting for the Emperor Realm inheritance, the three sects rely on their own abilities. The disciples of the Emptiness sect are inferior, while the disciples of the Taoist creed won fair and square. Why is it that when it comes out of your mouth, it's a completely different story? Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang stepped into the air and stood next to Zhu Biechio. The three sovereigns of Taoism lived and died together. Cut the crap. Hand over the disciple you fused with your inheritance. The Emperor of the Void Strike sect, who was dressed in black, stepped down from the chariot. His thunderous voice seemed to penetrate the Tao sect's protective formation and blasted into the ears of the Taoist disciples. At this moment, the thousands of disciples and elders on the training ground felt their minds tremble. An imposing figure of a Ren Huang appeared in their souls out of thin air, wanting everyone to kneel down and submit. Zhu Biechio ignored the Emperor of the Void Strike sect. He turned his gaze and looked to the other side. A little further to the east, the Taisui Emperor led the elders of the Taisui Mountain. They didn't gather with the Void Strike sect's army. No one knew what they were planning. Don't be nervous. I'm here today to admire your Renhuang martial arts. The Dao Sect's techniques are unpredictable. The Void Strike Sect's Void Strike Divine Palm is all-pervasive. As for the inheritance, it has nothing to do with me. The Taisui Emperor said with a cheeky smile. Beside him, Dui Tiancheng's face was extremely gloomy. Obviously, he had other intentions. Ji Biechio could naturally see that the other party was watching the fire burning across the river and wanted to reap the benefit. However, Ji Biechio didn't say anything. He warned coldly, "You better not interfere." "Hey, Ji Biechio, do you think I'm nothing but air?" Ji Biechio stomped his foot in the air. Instantly, space rumbled violently beneath his foot while strands of cracks spread out like a net of lightning, and it brought terrifying pressure to the disciples of the Taoist sect below. No one dares to treat the Emperor of the Void Strike sect as heir. "Tell me, what do you want?" "Hand over the inheritance." The Emperor of the Void Strike sect was flustered. My disciple fused with it. "Then hand him over." "Impossible." Ji Biechio refused straightforwardly. At this moment, the boundless space fell into silence. The Taoist sect master and the Emperor of the Void Strike sect stood across from each other. Their eyes were like swords. Only the whistling of the wind filled with killing intent could be heard. The atmosphere became more and more oppressive. "You're forcing the old man to bully the weak." Seeing this, the Emperor of the Void Strike sect slowly stood up from his chariot. With a slight movement, the airflow in the sky became chaotic. Astral winds raged and were comparable to thousands of blades and swords. An extremely terrifying emperors will press down. Then, a 7-story golden pagoda appeared in the Emperor of the Void Strike sect's hand. "Disciples dodge!" Ji Biechio exclaimed. He didn't hold back the Emperor's chi in his body. He pushed out with both palms, blasting out a layer of 8 trigrams Dao diagram that covered the entire sky. At the same time, Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang attacked at the same time. The Emperor's chi madly poured into the 8 trigrams Dao diagram. Although the 3 Taoist sects' specialties were different, their Taoist techniques were extremely similar. After thousands of years of practice, they almost instantly came from the same source. Naturally, they knew how to increase the power of Ji Biechio's 8 trigrams Dao diagram. The 3 emperors worked together. The Dao diagram grew larger and larger. It was like a divine light descending from the heavens. It stuck close to the sect's protective formation and turned into a second line of defense. The 7-story golden pagoda in the Emperor of the Void Strike sect's hand was a supreme-grade Emperor artifact. Rumble! The pagoda was thrown out of his hand. Surging Emperor's chi poured into it. The will of the Emperor of the Void Strike sect merged with the Divine Pagoda as if it had become his incarnation. The Divine Pagoda bloomed with dazzling power. It was like a mountain of the Great Path was crushing the universe. Almost as soon as it came into contact with the sect's protective formation, the formation light collapsed into pieces. Puff! 3 mouthfuls of blood sprayed out at the same time. Ji Biechio and the other 2 worked together, but they could only maintain the 8 trigrams Dao diagram for a few breaths. In the next moment, the light of the way dissipated. The Dao diagram that covered the sky and the sun fell apart. The bodies of the 3 sect leaders that the disciples relied on fell together with the pagoda. They fell heavily on the training field, shaking the ground and shaking the main peak. The disciples looked at this extremely shocking scene. It was as if the sky had collapsed. The peak's protective formation that the Taoist sects had worked so hard to maintain could not withstand a single blow from the divine pagoda of the Emperor of the Void Strike sect. How could they bear this? Was there such a great disparity in strength between the 2 sides? At this moment, fear turned into a haze that devoured their souls. The disciples of the Taoist sects were in despair. Education 123 Literature Network. Chapter 1677. Blood stained their clothes. Their spiritual souls were shaken, and they lost their hearing. Jean Biechio and the other 2 fell for a few seconds, unable to get up from the ground for a long time. The sky-striking sect is not simple. In the crowd, Qin Hao was slightly surprised. The yellow-browed elder was in the 6th tier of the Renhuang realm. He used the momentum of heaven and earth to release the power of the imperial weapon. Deputy Headmaster Bo was in the 2nd tier of the Matrix Emperor realm. The deployment of the Matrix was not done overnight. The wider the coverage, the stronger the power of the Matrix, and the more it tested the ability of the Matrix Maker. It was even more difficult to build a protective matrix. However, after the power of the Matrix was activated, the effect was often very strong. It was not a problem for the Matrix Maker to be several levels higher. Even though the yellow-browed elder was in the 6th tier of the Renhuang realm, it was not easy for him to destroy the matrix of the main peak. Moreover, Jean Bietio and the other two tried their best to stop him, but they were still crushed in one blow. The key was the tower in the yellow-browed elder's hand. It was not an ordinary imperial weapon. It was a top-grade imperial weapon with very advanced forging technique. It was extremely powerful. Top-grade imperial weapons were rare. It was difficult for ordinary Renhuang to get them. Qin Hao was surprised that the sky-striking sect had won. I thought that even if the Taoist sect was defeated, the 3 headmasters could still fight. I secretly did something, and this disaster was over. If the sky-striking sect did not have a top-grade imperial weapon, Qin Hao did not need to expose himself at all. But in the current situation, his identity as the Tribulation Sword Emperor could not be hidden. Fine. Before he left Dao sect, he would show off his divine power in front of everyone. Other than giving Dao sect a surprise, he would also make Shi Dong and Qing Qing proud for once. He would leave their beautiful days in the halo of the Tribulation Sword Sovereign. As for Qin Hao's true identity, it would always be a secret. Father! Headmaster! Uncle! Everyone rushed over and helped the 3 of them up from the ground. They did not expect that the sky-striking great ancestor would injure the 3 pillars of the Taoist sect with just one blow. It also destroyed all the unrealistic thoughts of the disciples. Today, the Taoist sect was facing a disaster. Cough cough. Top-grade imperial weapons are indeed powerful. It seems that the situation I was most worried about has happened. Zhu Biqiu channeled his emperor force and suppressed his surging qi and blood. He looked up at the end of the void, as if he was looking for a terrifying figure. Nephew Quan, when I saw all of you injured, the old man felt extremely pained as well. Thinking back to the past, the old man had once tasted tea with your grandfather on this Dao Peak, but what about all of you? You ordered your disciples to kill the top prodigy of the Strike Kong sect. If I don't come and demand an explanation for the deaths of Lu Guang and Lin Chang, how will the people of Nanjiang view me, the great ancestor Strike Kong? The yellow-browed old man's voice trembled. The moment the great formation was destroyed, he held the resplendent pagoda in his hand and directly floated above Zhu Biqiu's head, looking down at him. Do you still want to resist? Hee. Jean Biqiu smiled bitterly, revealing his sadness. He raised his head and said, Senior Nie has personally come to Dao Mountain with a top-grade imperial weapon. The 3 of us are not strong enough. How can we continue to resist? Forefather Zhang Kong felt very comfortable when he heard this. He stroked his beard proudly. Big brother. Bo Shang was shocked. Were they prepared to hand him over? Shi Yongnian lowered his head and clenched his fists. Hand him over? Even if his big brother really planned to do so, he could not hand Shi Dong over. The Shi clan owed that child too much. Don't be a coward, Zhu Biqiu. I'm waiting to admire your 8 trigrams. The Taisui Emperor also swaggered over in the void with a mocking smile on his face. If you have a problem with Senior Nie, you can go all out and try the power of a top-grade imperial weapon. Zhu Biqiu replied coldly. You have a problem with me? Forefather Strike Kong looked at the Taisui Emperor. The light of the pagoda in his hand flowed, and a devouring pressure fell on the Taisui Emperor's head. No, I have no problem with it. The Taisui Emperor quickly admitted defeat and was extremely embarrassed. Stop wasting time, Jiubiqiu. Hurry up and hand him over. The Strike Kong Sect Emperor hovered next to the yellow-browed old man, looking victorious. That's right. Hand him over. I came here this time to ask for someone from the Dao Gate. Your herb garden's alchemist Li Chuji spoke rudely to my Taisui Mountain. Today, I'll teach him a lesson. The Taisui Emperor's gaze swept over and sharply caught sight of Qin Hao's figure. He shouted, Li Chuji, get out here. The inheritance of a monarch? With forefather Strike Kong pressuring him, the Taisui Emperor clearly had no chance. Qin Hao had threatened Elder Song in the monarch tomb, which was a great disrespect to the Taisui Mountain. Moreover, Shi Dong's current achievements were largely due to his master. Dui Tianchang was humiliated and could not get back at Shi Dong, so the Taisui Emperor started with Li Chuji. Qin Hao stood in the crowd and smiled. He looked at the Taisui Emperor without a trace of reverence and had no intention of walking out. Senior Nye, please allow me to say something. Shi Dong has the bloodline of the Shi clan of the Dao Gate and has fused with the inheritance. If you strip away the inheritance of the corpse monarch, it will definitely cause immeasurable damage to Shi Dong. Ask yourself, if Jiubiqiu brought people to Strike Kong Sect and asked you to hand over your grandson, what would you do? Jiubiqiu cried out in pain. His eyes were gradually filled with blood. In your opinion, how should we deal with Shi Dong? Forefather Strike Kong's mouth twitched. If their positions were switched, he naturally would not hand over his grandson so easily. I'll fight with Nieli. Jiubiqiu gritted his teeth and pointed at the Strike Kong Sect Emperor. If I lose, I'll hand him over without hesitation. If I win... He paused. The yellow-brow ancestor replied, fine. If you win, the old man will turn around and leave without hesitation. Since I know your grandfather, the old man will give you juniors a chance. If you lose, you'll give up the Dao Gate and disband the Dao Gate. How about it? The space froze. The vast square and even the people of the two factions felt suffocated. Creak. Jiubiqiu clenched his fists and said, accept the challenge. If I lose, the Dao Gate will cease to exist. Lear. Forefather Strike Kong looked at the Strike Kong Sect Emperor. Nieli smiled lightly with a trace of disdain. If I lose to you, Jiubiqiu, I won't care about the Emperor's tomb. I'll stand upside down and eat feces in front of everyone. Lose? How could he lose? Jiubiqiu was a third-tier Renhuang, while Nieli was a fourth-tier Renhuang. Although the gap was not big and there was only a slight difference, as the Strike Kong Sect Emperor, he was also a peerless genius. Nieli's arrogance was no less than the dead Lu Guang's. Father, you're injured. Shi Qing looked extremely worried. If there was a better way, I wouldn't want to fight with him while injured. Unfortunately, we don't have any other way. Nieli, let me have a taste of your strike air palm. Jiubiqiu shouted. The Renhuang light on his body flickered as he slowly rose into the air. My strike air palm will definitely not disappoint you. The Strike Kong Sect Emperor Nieli also had the Renhuang light surging in his body. In his peak state, his aura was even stronger than Jiubiqiu's. He slowly rose until he was at the same height as his opponent. Suddenly, the battle that would determine the fate of the Dao Gate was about to be decided. This battle was about the dignity of the two Renhuangs. This battle was about Shi Dong's future. This battle could also be the last battle between Jiubiqiu and Nieli. You're so stubborn. Why do you have to do this? Qin Hao shook his head gently. He was about to attack, but he restrained himself. Chapter 1678. Translator, Transin Editor, Transin let us burn together. Elder Striking Kong held a supreme-grade Emperor artifact in his hand, easily shattering the Dao Peak's great formation. Today, even if he were to sacrifice himself, he would not be able to stop their advance. That would only cause more casualties to the Tao sect's disciples. Jean Bietio had suffered some internal injuries. It was better to fight Nieli one-on-one than to send all the disciples of the mountain to their deaths. This was because the result could not be changed. However, he had won by a fluke, and the higher-ups of the three sects had witnessed it. Today, the Striking Kong sect had brought along countless smaller forces. Even if the Striking Kong sect was unwilling, he couldn't slap his own face, right? After all, the promise had already been made. Qin Hao could understand Zhibichio's intentions, but the Air Strike sect would not give up on the inheritance. If they could not get it this time, they would find an excuse to attack Dao Mountain again in the future. At this moment, in the sky above the dojo, Zhu Biechou and Nie Li's bodies rose higher and higher. Two imperial auras enveloped the boundless space. Their wills penetrated madly, trying to crush each other. The people of the three clans watched the battle with rapt attention. It was rare for Renhuangs to fight, so it was worth their time to watch carefully. They could comprehend the essence of the Renhuangs' martial arts. Moreover, this battle was crucial to the fate of the two sections. Those from Taisui Mountain appeared to be very excited. Regardless of the outcome, it had nothing to do with them. After all, it was not Taisui Emperor who was fighting. Deafening cheers came from the army of cultivators led by the Air Strike sect. Their momentum was so great that it could topple mountains and overturn seas. It gave the Air Strike Dao Emperor great confidence. On the other hand, the disciples of the Dao sect were filled with worry. Their sect master was already at the first level of the Dao Emperor realm. Moreover, he was fighting while injured. Once they lost, not only would they have to hand over Sherdong, but the Qilin Dao sect would also cease to exist. Big brother, hold on! Shi Yongnian clenched his fists nervously. The three of them had always worked together. They wished they could fight Emperor Kong Dao together with Zhu Biqiu. Ji Biqiu, let this emperor see the progress of your martial arts in recent years. Nieli said coldly. Dazzling golden flames whizzed out, and a terrifying whirlwind seemed to roll up in the sky. Zhi Biqiu formed a seal with his palms, and the power of his bloodline surged. A dazzling 8 trigrams appeared beneath his feet. Qian, Zhen, Sun, Can ancient runes flowed out and surrounded his body. At this moment, Zhu Biechou's pupils constricted slightly. An ancient character was summoned by the mortal emperor's will, and it shone with dazzling light. It was like a sharp sword of qi that pierced towards the striking Dao Emperor. The striking Kong Dao Emperor laughed lightly with disdain. You dare not use your full strength when fighting me while injured? Destroy! As soon as he finished speaking, the space around the striking sky Dao Emperor surged with the sound of fluctuation. He didn't seem to have made any movement, yet the piercing sword qi seemed to have been crushed by an invisible and enormous force, and it was directly shattered into pieces. Qin Hao felt that there was a powerful force in the sky. It was different from the Taisui astral energy of Taisui Mountain. It could shatter the sword qi without a trace. This Strike Air Dao Emperor could actually use the Dao will to injure people from a distance. No wonder it was called the Strike Air sect. Interesting. Zhi Biqiu's face didn't change at all. They were both powerful cultivators of the same era, so they were naturally very familiar with each other's Dao technique. The 8 trigrams under his feet spun, and an ancient character flew out. His will merged into it, and then it shone brightly. The ancient character evolved into a towering mountain and pressed down. At this moment, the void rumbled and the space seemed to be crushed. The striking Kong Dao Emperor looked up with a serious expression. The force above his head was very strong, and the blood in his body surged. Strands of Emperor power condensed in his palm, and a dazzling flame burst out. It was so fast that it couldn't be blinked. He slammed his palm in the air, and there was still no movement. However, the space was filled with rolling thunder. It was as if there was an extremely terrifying sound wave moving forward and crashing into the mountain. In an instant, the mountain collapsed. Zhi Biqiu groaned, and a few drops of blood slowly dripped from the corner of his mouth. The aura around him fluctuated. "You're still holding on with your internal injuries." Qin Hao knew that Zhibiqiu was affected by his internal injuries, and the mountain formed by the 8 trigrams Tao character didn't have the effect it should have. At this rate, it would be extremely difficult to defeat the striking Kong Tao Emperor. The killing will within the 7 kills pagoda is corroding your organs. If you don't resolve it and continue to exhaust yourself with me, your injuries will spread and worsen. In the end, you'll be injured for the rest of your life, Nieli said. Then I'll use all my strength to end it in one strike. Zhibiqiu raised his palms high, and the 8 trigrams under his feet spun violently. An even more turbulent soul power was released in the form of light, and it continuously merged into the ancient characters. The will of the 8 trigrams Tao character suddenly skyrocketed, and they let out a heavy rumble. One by one, they left his body and blasted towards Nieli side by side. At this moment, the scene in the sky above the peak of the path reversed. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and countless storms were born. The ancient characters flickered with golden light, releasing different will of the way. They devoured everything and wanted to bury the striking Kong Tao Emperor. Nieli frowned. Zhibiqiu had indeed used his full strength this time. Even though he was fighting with injuries and wasn't in his best condition, he still couldn't be underestimated. With a deep shout, the striking Kong Tao Emperor stood there like a god of war. He raised his palms high as well, and his body transformed into tens of thousands of raging streams of air. His entire body was concealed within the streams of air. If it was any other time, he might be slightly fearful when facing Zhibiqiu's 8 ancient characters. But now that Zhibiqiu was injured, what did he have to fear? Waves of muffled sounds spread out, penetrating the void without a trace. Everyone felt as if there were countless streams of palm chi passing through the space, madly bombarding the 8 ancient characters like a storm. Even though they couldn't see it, the 8 ancient characters constantly flickered with explosive light. It was as if they were struck by palm after palm strike, and cracks gradually appeared. They shook violently until cracks covered every single one of the Tao characters. Boom! Boom! A series of sonic booms resounded through the world, and the 8 characters finally split apart and collapsed. Almost at the same time, Zhibiqiu, who was standing on the 8 trigrams, seemed to have been struck by tens of thousands of palms. His protective sovereign chi was gradually scattered and penetrated. His cyan Qilin Taoist robe was reduced to pieces under the torrential bombardment. Shocking palm prints appeared on the Renhuang's body one after another. Every time a palm landed, Zhibiqiu's legs gave the illusion that he was kneeling down, but he stubbornly held on. Blood kept flowing from his mouth, and he looked very miserable. Sect Master, Father, Zhou Qing and everyone else shed tears. The injured Zhibiqiu couldn't resist the striking Kong Tao Emperor after all. Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang clenched their fists so hard that blue veins popped out. The countless palm prints that penetrated the void seemed to have hit them at the same time. Seeing Zhibiqiu being bombarded made their hearts ache. But at this moment, the two of them didn't panic, because they knew that Zhibiqiu still had one more move. It was the ultimate emperor's method of Taoism that had never been revealed to the outside world. Do you still want to hold on? In the raging airflow, the striking Kong Tao Emperor stood with his hands behind his back. The Renhuangs were condensed into terrifying palm prints and bombarded Zhibiqiu's body like a torrential downpour. Hand over the inheritance, disband Taoism, and you'll still be Zhibiqiu. If you resist to the end, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep your life. Why do you have to do this? Just admit defeat. Lose. Zhibiqiu raised his head. Blood kept flowing from his mouth. His body was bombarded and could fall at any time, but the sharpness in his eyes didn't diminish. The one who loses may not be me. What? Nieli frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Lin Bing Do Zhe Jie Zhen Lai Qian Xing. Condense. Ignoring the blood and vomiting, Zhibiqiu seemed to have used all the strength in his body. His palms formed an ancient formula. Chapter 1679. Lin Bing and Doja advanced in formation. This was the most complete scripture of Taoism, the 9 words celestial art. There were only 9 words in the 9 words celestial formula, and each word contained an incomparably powerful will of the Tao. To comprehend, cultivate, and master all of them, and use them in battle, one would need unimaginable perseverance and extraordinary talent of the cultivator. Otherwise, one would not be able to comprehend the essence of the 9 words celestial art. Not long ago, Jiu Biechio had just comprehended the 8th word. He did not expect to use it in battle so soon. Moreover, his opponent was the striking Kong Tao Emperor. The 9 words celestial art was extremely destructive. Once it was used, it could not be interrupted. Even Jiu Biechio himself could not stop it. Once the celestial art was used, the enemy would definitely die unless they had enough power to kill the user. The striking Kong Tao Emperor's strength was similar to the Taoism sect leaders. Even though Jiu Biechio was injured internally, Nieli did not have the cultivation to kill him. Therefore, the striking Kong Tao Emperor would definitely lose this battle. Of course, Jiu Biechio would not have it easy either. He had comprehended the 8 words but forcefully formed the 9 words celestial art. The price of the 9 words celestial art was his life spirit. Incomparably violent might of the Wei roared, shaking the heavens and the earth. Space collapsed under the power of the Wei, and terrifying cracks crisscrossed. The moment the 9 words celestial mantra was uttered from Jiu Biechio's mouth, the everlasting peak of the Wei seemed to let out a cry. At this moment, Jiu Biechio's imperial power skyrocketed. 9 rays of celestial light descended from the sky and landed on the striking Kong Tao Emperor's head. Nieli felt his scalp go numb. The celestial light that pressed down on him made his soul tremble. This power was too terrifying. In the training ground, Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang looked up quietly. Jiu Biechio's celestial light surged to the extreme, but they could not help but cry. They knew that once the celestial art was used, the Jiu clan would lose their leader. The Taoism sect would no longer have a sect leader Jiu. Nieli's eyes widened. He looked at the Taoism sect leader in the celestial light in shock. Was he hiding such a terrifying celestial art? Why had he never seen him use it before? Could it be an imperial art passed down from the peak of the Taoism sect? No one knew how terrifying the 9 words celestial art was because today was the first time in 1,000 years. At this moment the heavens and the earth seemed to be roaring. Boundless immortal light crushed down towards the sky above Tao Emperor, and the terrifying might of the Tao caused all the spectators to feel terrified. Among the spectators, the Taisui Emperor's palm had been placed on his chest, as if he couldn't breathe. He stared at everything with his eyes wide open. Earlier, he had said that he wanted to admire the power of the Taoist sect master's mysterious method. Now that he had seen it, it brought him a deep shadow of fear. Ancestor Ji Kong was unable to remain calm. His heart pounded violently as his eyes were filled with disbelief. Just what grade of power was the 9 words celestial light? Emperor grade? It actually made him shudder with fear. Nieli was afraid that he would be in danger. However, there was no way to stop this. Victory and defeat hadn't been decided yet, and whoever interfered first would be eliminated. Ancestor Ji Kong didn't dare act rashly, and even Ji Biechio couldn't stop even if he wanted to. Stop it. Stop it for this emperor. Nieli felt death approaching for the first time. The will of the Ren Huang in his body completely erupted, and there seemed to be countless palms piercing through the void. All of them slammed towards the Taoist sect master, and Ji Biechio was on the verge of collapse. Ji Biechio stomped his foot, and the 8 trigrams flew up like a huge millstone that blotted out the sky. It pressed down on Nye Li's head and merged with the 9 immortal shadows. The 9 words celestial art flowed in the Tao diagram, replacing the positions of Qian, Zhen, Sun, and Kansas. At this moment, the light of the Tao diagram rushed into the sky and raged. It was incomparably sacred, as if an immortal formation had descended upon the world. It was unstoppable. GB Chio, you're crazy. Even though you've severely injured me, you're definitely going to die. Nye Li went completely berserk. His will drove the divine palm of the void to attack wildly, and the violent power blasted GB Chio into a bloody mess. Crazy? As long as you're defeated, the Taoist sect won't lose. Even though I'm dead, the Taoist sect will still exist. We've lost a sect master, but there will be thousands of sect masters in the future. Blood kept dripping down from his face, and the indescribable pain numbed his nerves. Perhaps his bones had already been shattered, but GB Chio stood upright with his hot blood and a crazy smile on his face. Even if he died, what was there to fear? Sherdong would carry the Taoist sect and become an even more outstanding sect master than him. He might even become the second Taoist ancestor. Father! Shi Qing was sobbing below. Father and daughter were connected by heart, and they could feel GB Chio's will to die, as well as his reluctance to part with the Taoist sect. Perhaps her father was regretful that he couldn't personally see Sherdong lead the Taoist sect to greatness. Rumble! Rumbles continued in the void, as if the heavens were collapsing. The Taoist diagram that covered the sky pressed down on the striking emperor's head, and the celestial light of the 9 words flowed within it. Nye Li tried his best to raise his palms high, trying to resist it by force. However, the Taoist might contained in the Taoist diagram was boundless, and it almost shattered his arms and crushed his spiritual soul. Even though Nye Li howled madly to resist, he was still pressed down from the sky. However, the striking emperor's divine light released by Nye Li's Renwang's will did not stop. On the verge of collapse, palm shadows finally appeared in the void, and they bombarded GB Chio in a frenzy. GB Chio seemed to have lost consciousness. His body was on the verge of collapse, and blood spurted out of his mouth like a fountain. He laughed loudly and fell at the same time as the striking emperor. "Old man, stop!" Grand Ancestor Striking Emperor roared, shaking the heavens and the earth. Surging emperor's might filled the air, and the 7 Kills pagoda in his palm bloomed with terrifying killing light. He finally couldn't help but make a move. Almost at the same time, the sword energy in Qin Hao's body hummed, and wisps of tribulation light were faintly discernible, wanting to break out of his body. He couldn't just watch GB Chio die. This person was willing to do anything for the Tao sect. Of course, GB Chio didn't do anything wrong. He chose to sacrifice himself to become Sherdong and help the Tao sect. He protected the foundation of the Tao sect that had been passed down for thousands of years with his death. His spirit was extremely precious. Admit defeat, we admit defeat. Emperor Yuan's inheritance is here. Senior Striking Emperor, please spare Sect Master Ji's life. Just as Qin Hao and Grand Ancestor Striking Emperor were about to make a move, a shout suddenly sounded from the direction of the Tao Palace. It was especially abrupt and ear-piercing at this critical moment. After that, 2 figures flew into the battlefield at the same time. Surprisingly, it was Shi Zhenhua and Sherdong. To everyone's astonishment, Shi Zhenhua was holding a sword against Sherdong's neck, and he was loudly begging for mercy from the Skystrike Tao Emperor. Blood was about to flow out and his body was about to turn into meat paste. When the Tao sect master, who had endured countless attacks from Tao Emperor Striking Emperor, saw this scene, he was so angry that he trembled violently and almost fainted on the spot. His mind was unstable, and with a loud bang, the Tao diagram that flowed with immortal light shattered and exploded. The force that suppressed the Tao Emperor's soul dissipated, and it was as if he had just escaped from the gates of hell. The Tao Emperor's expression was ferocious, and he looked for an opportunity to attack Zhu Biqiu with his fingers. In an instant, a sharp sound pierced through space and blasted onto the two bodies. Puff, puff. Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang vomited blood at the same time. The two of them hugged Zhu Biqiu tightly with both hands and withstood Tao Emperor's striking Emperor's attack with their backs. They managed to save Zhu Biqiu, but the moment they landed on the ground, three figures collapsed. Ha 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 ha! These people from the Tao sect. Grand Ancestor Striking Emperor laughed until he was out of breath. The light of the 7 Kills pagoda in his hand dissipated. He was about to make a move, but in the end, the Tao sect admitted defeat. Not only did they admit defeat, but someone even personally handed over the inheritance. Zhu Biqiu, on the other hand, was pitiful. Chapter 1680. The boundless space of the Mountain of the Way fell into a dead silence. Only Great Ancestor Ji Kong's earth-shattering laughter could be heard, as well as Nye Li's angry and heavy breathing. He had almost been killed by the 9 words celestial mantra. If it weren't for the appearance of the two Taoists at the critical moment, Nye Li would have been able to defeat or even kill Tao Emperor Ji Kong before he died. If that had happened, the inheritance would not have been taken away from the Taoists today. Unfortunately, Shi Zhenhua made Zhu Biqiu's efforts go to waste. Everything he had sacrificed was in vain. Great Ancestor Ji Kong laughed crazily and coughed. Within the Mountain of the Way, all the disciples saw the 3 Taoists fall to the ground. They were all silent, as if they were using silence to express their endless sorrow. "You bastard!" Shurichi was trembling all over. He pointed at Shi Zhenhua. If it weren't for Shi Dong's life, he would have rushed up and slapped him to death. Elder Yu immediately rushed to Zhu Biqiu and the other two. The old man who was usually muddle-headed was now extremely cautious and serious. He checked the 3's injuries one by one and methodically took out various pills for them to take. Zhu Biqiu's injuries were the most serious. His body was damaged, his organs were damaged, and many of his bones were broken. His body was almost smashed into a pulp by Nye Li's palm. The foundation of a Ren Huang was deep enough. Given time to recuperate, his injuries could be healed in 100 years. What made Elder Yu helpless was that the soul in Zhu Biqiu's body was rapidly dissipating. The will of the last word of the 9 words celestial mantra was forcefully condensed by his life spirit. Such a price could not be made up for in a lifetime. Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang's situation wasn't optimistic either. Like Zhu Biqiu, they also had internal injuries. Nye Li had mercilessly attacked them like a malicious spirit, but in the end, all of his attacks had landed on their bodies. It would be very difficult for them to recover in a few decades. This battle should not have ended like this. The worst-case scenario would have been the death of the Taoists. Shi Zhenhua's surprising actions had pushed the 3 of them into a pit of fire. "Grandfather, you don't have to look at me like that. Everything I did was for the Taoists." Shi Zhenhua faced the crowd. His hand holding the sword was trembling violently. His heart was pounding, and he was also very afraid. After all, he was no different from a traitor of the Tao sect. However, for the sake of protecting Shi Dong, the Qilin Tao Mountain destroyed the legacy of their ancestors. It was unfair to the Tao sect, unfair to the disciples of the Tao sect, and unfair to the ancestors of the Tao sect. Shi Zhenhua didn't want this to happen. He also wanted the sect to prosper. However, the situation had already reached a point where it could not be disobeyed. Why did he have to persist? Why couldn't they sacrifice Shi Dong to protect the Tao sect, protect the disciples of the Tao Mountain, and protect the foundation of their ancestors? Shi Zhenhua's temples were throbbing violently, and heavy breaths came out of his nostrils. Because of his nervousness, his eyes gradually became bloodshot. He did not do anything wrong. He did it for the Tao sect, for everyone, and of course for himself. Even if he had to bear the name of a traitor, he felt that it was worth it. The future disciples of Taoism would definitely be able to be ordinary for him. Only the future generations would understand his deep sense of righteousness. He was a hero. Taoism. Do you know what is Taoism? Hearing Shi Zhenhua's anxious call, Zhang Bieqiu took a deep breath and slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Shi Zhenhua, and the look in his eyes was too heart-wrenching. Taoism? Why was Taoism established at the beginning? Because they were like-minded, and the ancestors of the three clans had the same ambitions. That was why Qilin Taoism Mountain was created. Taoism Mountain was only a name. It didn't represent anything. Only the martial will of the three clans could be considered the true Taoism. And all of this had to be built on the foundation of talents. Taoism Mountain would only exist if people existed. Only geniuses could carry the martial tradition of Taoism Mountain. If Taoism Mountain was empty, what was the use of leaving an empty mountain? Could it be called Taoism? Of course, if a person's cultivation was strong enough to intimidate the 4 regions and 8 desolations, like Dendi who fell in Daqin 600 years ago, then to the sect, there was another layer of explanation. It could be said that Dendi was the Daqin. Without Dendi, Daqin was only an empty shell. Coincidentally, Shi Dong had this kind of temperament. His future was enough to support the will of Taoism alone. As long as he existed, Taoism Mountain would exist. Everyone who saw Shi Dong would involuntarily revere Taoism. Unfortunately, Shi Zhenhua's vision was too narrow. He couldn't understand Ji Bieqiu at all. His understanding of Taoism wasn't at the level of the sect master. If it was, he wouldn't have done such a ridiculous thing. We entrusted Shi Dong to you. Do you know how much trust we have in you? Shi Yongnian sadly shook his head. Perhaps Shi Zhenhua was really afraid of death. There was an ancient formation buried under the Taoism temple. It was personally laid down by a certain ancestor. At a critical moment, it could eliminate a problem for Taoism and instantly transfer disciples. It was too old. Ji Bieqiu had checked it and found that the formation was malfunctioning. Even if Bo Shang tried his best to restore a part of the formation, the number of people transferred was extremely small. Handing Shi Dong to Shi Zhenhua was equivalent to entrusting the hope of Taoism to him. While saving Shi Dong, wasn't it also giving Shi Zhenhua a way out? However, he had completely betrayed the trust of the 3. Ha ha ha, my 3 nephews, you can deal with the internal affairs of Taoism later. Now that Ji Bieqiu has been defeated by Nieli, according to the agreement, I will bring him to Mount Strike Kong. Patriarch Strike Kong spoke and stepped into the air. He did not wait for a reply and directly walked towards Shi Dong and Shi Zhenhua. Obviously, regardless of whether Taoism was willing or not, he was going to forcefully take them away. How dare you? Ji Bieqiu tried his best to stand out and stop him. Shi Yongnian and Bo Shang did the same. Unfortunately, they could no longer support their heavily injured bodies. Whoosh! At this moment, nearly 1,000 disciples of Taoism stepped forward at the same time. They turned into a tide of people and surrounded Shi Dong and Shi Zhenhua in the center. Form the formation. Ji Bieqiu roared. Behind him, 30 to 40 disciples released their primordial qi at the same time. Suddenly, a surge of fiery radiance rose into the air and turned into a wall of fire in front of them. Shi Lang's legs trembled. He glanced at Shi Zhenhua with disdain and stepped forward firmly. A sword formation radiance was led by him and turned into streaks of sword qi that wandered above the wall of fire. Bo Ming formed a palm and drew a yin and yang. The disciples of the martial pavilion worked together and a huge yin and yang formation radiance surged out, forming a path in front of Patriarch Strike Kong. The 3 clans of Taoism swore not to hand them over. You guys are silly. Shi Zhenhua's eyes were wet as he looked at the hot-blooded scene. Even the disciples of the Sword Valley were not afraid of death and defended the dignity of Taoism. For some reason, at this moment, Shi Zhenhua suddenly felt a surge of regret. Could it be that he was really wrong? Get out of the way for old man. Patriarch Strike Kong saw that a group of Taoism juniors dared to stop him. It was as if his face had been stomped on. He waved his Taoist robe and suddenly, the weather in the training hall changed. A terrifying wind swept forward and turned into a twisting storm. He wanted to see who could stop him today. The powerful will of Ren Huang crushed and the storm roared. Although Ji Biechio and the other two formed a formation in front of him, they seemed so insignificant in front of Patriarch Strike Kong. Has the Taoist sect finally reached the end of its days? Woo woo woo! At this moment, an inexplicable sigh came from the depths of the souls of countless disciples. It sounded like the sigh of an old man. Not only the disciples, but all the elders, deacons, and even the 3 severely injured sect leaders heard it at the same time. It sounded from the depths of the Tao Peak. It was real and seemed to come from a long time ago. At this moment, everyone could not help but think of an old story that had been passed down for a long time in Qilin Taoism. The Tao mountain had a spirit. The Tao ancestor was buried in it. The ancestral spirits had protected the Tao mountain for generations and did not allow outsiders to invade it. Could it be that the Tao ancestor had appeared? Pairs of astonished eyes looked at each other. It was not an illusion, and not only one person heard it. The disciples of Taoism got the answer from the eyes of their fellow disciples. Crash! An ear-piercing shattering sound spread out like a mirror falling to the ground. The terrifying storm that was roaring forward was shattered into nothingness in front of a figure that appeared out of nowhere. Chapter 1681. No one could confirm whether the ancestral lord had shown up or not. The sigh came and disappeared suddenly, giving people an illusion. But one thing was certain, Li Chuji was definitely not an ordinary saint-level alchemist. At this moment, Li Chuji was floating in the air between ancestral Lord Ji Kong and the Taoist disciples. In front of him was the ancestral Lord Ji Kong, and behind him were the defeated Taoist disciples. Before the storm could get close, it disappeared in an instant, which was a huge shock to everyone. Ancestral Lord Ji Kong's cultivation was so strong that he treated the sect protection array as if it was just a decoration. The 3 sect masters were no match for him, but Li Chuji appeared and directly restrained him on the spot. The latter even looked calm. Ancestral Lord Ji Kong's eyes narrowed to the size of a needle tip. There were other powerful cultivators besides Si Biechio and the other 2? He asked, "Who is it?" Qin Hao glanced at the other party indifferently as if he was looking at an ant. The corners of his mouth curled into a disdainful smile. He turned around and did not give any response. His figure drifted towards Shi Zhenhua. Along the way, the crowd of Taoist disciples took the initiative to open up a path. Third Elder Chu. Tao Wu's eyes were filled with shock when he saw Qin Hao walk past him. Third Elder Chu. Elder Qi stepped forward and wanted to speak, but he found that he couldn't even call out the other party's name. In the blink of an eye, Li Chuji had become so unfamiliar. Qin Hao didn't respond to anyone. The disciples opened a path for him. He stood directly in front of Shi Zhenhua. His usual cheeky face was extremely cold at this moment. Shi Zhenhua didn't even dare to meet Qin Hao's eyes. "Let go." 2 simple words were spat out, mixed with a killing intent that penetrated the soul. With a crash, Shi Zhenhua's hand trembled, and the sharp sword on Shi Dong's neck immediately fell to the ground. The flexible blade even bounced a few times when it touched the stone floor. Gulp! Shi Zhenhua swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty, his throat cracking. Unknowingly, his legs became numb, and he became stiff on the spot, not daring to move at all. Shi Zhenhua was not a fool. He did not release any aura, but he was able to disperse the might of the great ancestor of the 6th Renhuang realm. What level did this Li Chuji belong to? Master! Shi Dong smiled helplessly, his voice filled with humiliation. Early this morning, he had been summoned by the sect master to the Taoist hall. As a result, as soon as he entered, his cultivation was sealed by Jean Biechio on the spot. If he had known that the sect master was willing to sacrifice the entire Taoist mountain just to protect him, he definitely would not have set foot in the Taoist hall. He, Shi Dong, was not someone who feared death. There was also Shi Zhenhua. Because Shi Dong's cultivation was sealed, he was unable to move. This allowed the scum of the Taoist sect to take advantage of the situation and place a sword on his neck. He felt that he had embarrassed Qin Hao. Qing, take good care of your junior brother. Qin Hao waved his hand and an infinite amount of energy enveloped Shi Dong, easily dissolving Jean Bichio's pressure. Then, he walked towards Elder Yu. You want me to take care of my junior brother again? You're always saying the same thing. Yin Qingqing, as usual, complained. However, her eyes were filled with tears of excitement. Her gaze was fixed on her master's back. At this moment, she knew that her master was not a simple person. Junior 3, Bichio and the others are very pitiful. As Qin Hao walked over, Elder Yu let out a pained sigh and took the initiative to step aside. Qin Hao nodded and squatted down slowly. His deep eyes flashed with a sharp light, giving people a deep sense of pressure. In an instant, he saw through the three's situation. Pitiful. Indeed, pitiful. Putting aside the Renhuang's physical body, Jean Bichio's most serious injury was his Yuan soul. He suffered from the backlash of the 9 words celestial art. His soul was almost drained dry and his Yuan soul had collapsed. If he was treated with normal methods, he would not be able to survive. However, it was precisely because of Shi Zhenhua's appearance that Jean Bichio's Dao heart was affected, causing his will to become unstable. The power of the 9 words celestial art was not fully released. There was still a bit of soul power left in his body. Although it dissipated very quickly, once Dilly suppressed it and used the tranquil water to stabilize his broken Yuan soul, there was a high chance that he would recover. However, this would take some time. As for Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang's injuries, they were only flesh wounds and were nothing to worry about. Junior 3, we can't be saved. Take Shi Dong and leave. You guys go. Jean Bichio's breathing was very fast, as if his life was coming to an end. Although he did not know Qin Hao's true identity, he believed that Li Chuji had the ability to save them after seeing him disperse the great ancestor Zhang Kong's will. Don't talk when you're sick. I'll take care of everything from now on. Qin Hao slowly stood up. An incomparably dazzling sword aura whizzed out of his body, forming a raging whirlwind. The brilliant sword will of the great path flowed through his body, making him look like a sword god. He lowered his head to look at the 3 people. 3 beams of sword aura shot out from his fingertips. The crystal-clear sword aura penetrated their bodies and pierced into their blood vessels. Jean Bichio and the other 2 people's bodies convulsed at the same time. It was as if they had been struck by an electric current. In just an instant, they felt an unprecedented surge of power. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang were injured. Dao Emperor Zhang Kong's broken back and mangled flesh miraculously healed quickly. Crack, crack, crack. As if his bones were regenerating, a sacred rumbling sound came from Jean Bichio's body. Under Zhang Qing's shocked expression, he was the first to stand up shakily. How is this possible? Elder Yu pressed his palm to his chest, as if he had a myocardial infarction. He felt that it was difficult to breathe. Not only did his injuries heal quickly, but he also felt that his soul power was recovering from Jean Bichio's aura. This sword will. Chu-san, you are South Sky Peaks. Jean Bichio looked at Qin Hao dumbfounded. He couldn't be wrong. He had experienced it himself. It was impossible for him to be wrong. However, at this time, Qin Hao had already walked far away. He stepped into the void and went in front of great ancestor Zhang Kong. Haha, there's going to be a good show. I really didn't expect this. Bo Shang clenched his fists. He was more energetic than ever. He looked at Qin Hao's back with a smile. Big brother, take a guess. Is old Taoist Zhang Kong stronger, or is our Li Chuji stronger? Why don't the three of us make a bet? The heavy weight on his shoulders seemed to have been lifted out of thin air. Shi Yongnian felt relieved, like an outsider. Shut up. He is Tribulation Sword Emperor. Zhan Biqiu reprimanded him sternly. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, I think our Chu-san might be stronger. His gasps could be heard all around. Tribulation Sword Emperor. The Tribulation Sword Emperor, who flew to Nanjiang City and occupied South Sky Peak, was actually Li Chuji of the Taoist school's outer yard? This. At this moment, the worldview of many deacons of Taoist school was turned upside down. The nerves in their heads were twisted into a ball, as if they would faint at any time. I should have guessed it. He really didn't let me down. Bo Sameo nodded with incomparable appreciation. In the cemetery, the elites of the three sects had suffered great losses, but the combat strength of Taoist school was intact. It was very strange. Thinking about how Shi Zhenhua dragged Shi Qing away and escaped, facing the siege of two high-level undead generals and the sea of corpses, Bo Sameo and his disciples had no chance of surviving. Were the two talismans that saved everyone really carved by Elder Qi? Could Elder Qi defeat two undead generals who were stronger than him with the talismans he carved? Nonsense. Elder Qi's cultivation hadn't improved. All of this was because Li Chuji hid too deeply and his cultivation was too strong. He was Tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. Chapter 1682. In the martial field, after the name of Tribulation Sword Emperor spread, everyone's mood instantly rose. Today, old ancestor Ji Kong was pressuring the mountain, and the originally fearful atmosphere had changed at this moment. It gradually changed from nervousness to excitement, and a strand of anticipation arose in the hearts of everyone. Who would have thought that the Tribulation Sword Emperor from the outside world would change his name to Li Chuji and become an alchemist guarding the herb garden? With such a strong cultivation, why would he lower himself to guard the herb garden for the Taoist sect? Jiu Biechio and the other two had mixed feelings. They had never thought that the Tribulation Sword Emperor, whom they couldn't invite with 8 palanquins, would come to the Taoist sect without anyone knowing. Could it be that all the masters liked this? At this time, countless eyes were looking at Yin Qingqing and Shi Dong with envy. Li Chuji, who was despised by everyone in the herb garden, suddenly became the Tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. Many outstanding talents in South River City wanted to be his disciple, but they couldn't find a way. However, Yin Qingqing and Shi Dong were lucky to have been taught by the Tribulation Sword Emperor for 8 years. Woo woo! Yin Qingqing couldn't help it. She squatted down, hugged her legs, and cried. No one cared about her and Shi Dong before, but now? Look at these people's eyes. They were envious and longing to be the successor of the Tribulation Sword Emperor like her. Shi Dong was shocked and his eyes were sore. Was his master's real identity so powerful? But for the past 8 years, he had been guarding the herb garden, and no one had shown any interest in it. Every time Zhenhua stood in front of his master, he would have an overbearing and arrogant attitude. Shi Dong didn't understand, because he didn't know that Qin Hao wasn't guarding the herb garden, but a promise he had once made. The Dao Peak fell into silence once more. Qin Hao strode forward with his hands behind his back and faced the mountain-guarding ancestor of the Void Strike sect. His aura of being able to hold back 10,000 men by himself made others secretly praise him. What a matchless sword king! At this moment, in front of the Taisui mountain team, the Taisui emperor was also shocked. Since Jiu Biechue recognized Qin Hao by his sword intent, the Taisui emperor, who had been to South Sky Peak, naturally recognized him. I never thought that Li Chuji of the Taoist sect would be the Tribulation Sword Emperor of South Sky Peak. The Taisui Emperor took a few deep breaths. Qin Hao seemed to have sensed him. He casually looked over, and there seemed to be sharp sword chi shooting out from his eyes. He said, "I've taken the initiative to come out now. Your Highness Taisui Emperor, do you want to teach me a lesson?" In the Emperor's cave in the cemetery, Qin Hao had indeed threatened Song Zhonglao. Therefore, today the Taisui Emperor personally came to teach this arrogant disciple who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Of course, it would naturally be better if he could seize the inheritance during the chaos. Unfortunately, Ancestor Ji Kong didn't give the Taisui Emperor the chance to do so. He directly attacked and crushed the 3 sect leaders of the Dao sect. Now, there was a need for Qin Hao to repeat himself. Was the Taisui Mountain serious about teaching him a lesson? Hee. The Taisui Emperor let out a dry laugh as he slowly returned to his original position in the sky above the dojo. It would be a piece of cake for him to deal with Li Chuji, but he didn't want to die against Tribulation Sword Emperor. After all, he had been to the South Sky Peak with Taoist Emperor Ji Kong. Only a wisp of sword chi flew out from the peak and severely injured both of them. In order to save face, the Taisui Emperor later told the elders of the sect that he and Tribulation Sword Emperor had a fierce battle. Both of them had their own merits, and it was not easy to defeat him completely. The Taisui Emperor didn't know how Taoist Emperor Ji Kong explained to the higher-ups of the sect after he returned. Anyway, that was what he said. But now they were not on the South Sky Peak. They were under the watchful eyes of thousands of disciples of the 3 sects and the martial artists of the 15 Nanjiang counties. Look, the sky and the ground in the distance were densely packed with figures. How could he dare to attack Qin Hao for the second time? Should he let Qin Hao strike again and send him back to the Taisui Mountain? How shameless could he be? "Who on earth are you?" the yellow-browed elder roared. As the Grand Patriarch of the Strike Kong sect, how could Qin Hao ignore him like this? If he hadn't seen Qin Hao personally suppress the injuries of Zhu Biechio and the other 2, and if the Taisui Emperor hadn't shrunk back like a coward, the Great Patriarch of the Strike Kong sect would never have tolerated Qin Hao's rudeness. However, his intuition as a martial artist told him that this young man with sword will flowing around him was by no means an ordinary person. He was at least a Renhuang, and his cultivation was even stronger than Zhu Biechio's. "I'll give you a chance to choose, leave or die," Qin Hao finally replied, but this sentence almost made the Great Patriarch of the Strike Kong sect explode with anger. The 7-kill pagoda in his hand suddenly shone with terrible light. He pointed at Qin Hao and roared, "What did you say?" "Great Patriarch, this man is Tribulation Sword Emperor." At this time, Nieli stepped forward and introduced Qin Hao in a low voice. "Tribulation Sword Emperor? When did this damned thing come out of Nanjiang City?" the Great Patriarch of the Strike Kong sect asked seriously. Because he had been in seclusion all year round, he didn't know what had happened in Nanjiang City, nor did he know that the southern heavenly sacred peak, which the 3 sects had coveted for a long time, had been forcibly occupied. In short, this man is very strong. The corner of Nieli's mouth twitched a few times. Damn thing? The Great Patriarch really dared to say that. How strong is he? Is he stronger than the old man? The Great Patriarch of the Strike Kong sect pointed at Qin Hao. He, Nierong, had become the first Renhuang in the Nanjiang area 200 years ago. Nieli closed his mouth and didn't dare to answer. What else could he say? He and the Taisui Emperor joined forces, but they couldn't even withstand one sword strike from Qin Hao. Without using the 7-kill pagoda, even the Great Patriarch couldn't do it. Walking forward silently, Nieli respectfully cupped his fists at Qin Hao and said, "My friend, you've hidden your strength well. I didn't expect you to lower yourself and become a lowly alchemist to take care of the herb garden on this mountain. If you're interested, the Strike Kong sect will welcome you at any time." Qin Hao waved his hand and interrupted, "Let's go. I don't want to kill. My friend, this has nothing to do with you. Why do you have to stand up for Jiubiechio? No matter what he gives you, the Strike Kong sect is willing to give it 10 times more. Even the position of Deputy Mountain Master, as long as you nod your head, I, Nieli, am willing to be on an equal footing with Tribulation Sword Emperor. Nieli said. On an equal footing with me? You're not qualified. Qin Hao tried to persuade him. How dare you? The great patriarch of the Strike Kong sect was furious. Who did he think the Strike Kong sect was? Get out of here! Qin Hao roared, and an extremely sharp sword chi flow suddenly came out of the void. Creak! The great patriarch of the Strike Kong sect clenched his fists and laughed. Good, very good. The old man has been a Renhuang for 300 years, and you are the first person who dares to tell me to get out of here. Nieli, if you are afraid of this person, just step back. I will show you how our Strike Kong sect's Wei Palm tames humans and animals. Great Patriarch. When Nieli heard this, he immediately tensed up. Get out of here! The great patriarch of the Strike Kong sect roared. Tribulation Sword Emperor, the strength of the Nie family is far beyond your imagination. Take care of yourself. Nieli knew that the great patriarch was determined to fight, so he didn't try to stop him. He wasn't worried about the outcome of this battle. But there was one condition. If the great patriarch was injured, Tribulation Sword Emperor would pay an extremely heavy price, and he might even lose his life. Nieli stepped back, and so did Emperor Taisui. Both of them knew very well the power of Tribulation Sword Emperor's way of the sword. Of course, the great patriarch of the Strike Kong sect might not lose. Nierong held a supreme-grade imperial artifact, and the power he released was enough to shake a high-level Renhuang. The battle between the two sides would probably be quite fierce. They were evenly matched. Chapter 1683. In the sky, two figures floated opposite each other, one old and one young, staring at each other. On the ground, in the air, and even in the sky far away from the mountain of the Wei, warriors stood there. Countless people watched the battle with keen eyes, looking forward to it. Great Elder Ji Kong and Emperor Jiejian, two epoch-making cultivators of Nanjiang City, were fighting. No one knew if the older generation of Renhuang would remain undefeated, or if the new generation of Emperor Jiejian would surpass them. Everyone saw dazzling Renhuang light flowing around both of them. In the space around Great Elder Ji Kong, heavy muffled sounds were heard, as if countless palm prints were violently striking. The momentum was shocking. Qin Hao was surrounded by sword will. Traces of light formed by swordsmanship flashed, and a terrible sharp aura cut through the space. The sword light in his eyes was so strong that no one dared to look at him directly. His entire body seemed to have become the incarnation of the sword. Humph, Emperor Jiejian of Nanjiang? Great Elder Ji Kong snorted disdainfully. He raised his hand and swept it forward. The void roared, and an invisible force rolled forward. Sonic booms were heard, as if it could crush everything. It's just an empty title. I didn't admit it. Qin Hao's face was expressionless. The sword will around him resonated with the light of catastrophe. A beam of light pierced through at an extremely fast speed. With a bang, the pressure from the space exploded midway and dissipated into nothingness. Great Elder Ji Kong's tone was tough, but his attack was cautious. This attack was condensed by the will of Renhuang and did not incorporate any martial arts technique. It was obviously a test. However, Qin Hao did not care about a mere will of Renhuang. He blocked it easily with a ray of sword will. Jiubiechio's heart trembled. The three of them were trapped in the sword aura of South Sky Peak and felt the power of Emperor Jiejian. However, the opponent was the great elder of the Ji Kong clan. How could Li Chuji be so casual when facing Nierong? Both of them were very strong. It seems that you do have some skills. No wonder Nieli is afraid of you. However, Nieli will never be able to reach the level of Old Man Kong's palm strike even if he practiced for another 100 years. After Great Ancestor Strike Kong tested the waters, he knew that the Tribulation Sword Sovereign was not much weaker than him, and was worth taking seriously. Dazzling Renhuang light bloomed. Golden primordial chi rolled and raged. Countless warriors appeared around Great Elder Qigong, surrounding him in the center. There were more than 1,000 of them. These figures were ethereal and illusory. They were the condensation of Renhuang's will. At this moment, they moved in unison. Their palms opened and closed, and at the same time, they blasted a palm toward Qin Hao across the air. For a moment there was a loud whistling sound, and a roar like muffled thunder rolled and roared. However, there was no trace of the light of the palm in the air. There was only the feeling of an overwhelming pressure that crazily swallowed and crushed forward. Ancestor's air striking palm has improved again. Nieli praised. Just like the Tai Sui mountain, the Nye clan's ancestor also had Emperor Yuan. The air striking palm was passed down from then on. It was a set of extraordinary emperor techniques that could be used together with the bloodline of the clan members. It could injure others invisibly and was extremely powerful. Qin Hao felt the pressure getting closer and closer. The luster of flames rose in his eyes. His divine consciousness could see the dense palm energy flying in front of him. It pierced through the void and blasted toward his body. The air-striking sect has surpassed the Tao sect to become the overlord of Nanjiang. It's not an undeserved reputation. Nierong's palm technique was not simple. Renhuang cultivators borrowed the power of heaven and earth to release their might. Although they could injure others invisibly, in essence, the moment the attack was launched, it was still driven by primordial qi and martial arts technique. Because the speed was too fast, others could not see it clearly. However, no Renhuang in the 4 regions of the Divine Wilderness could be like the Nye clan. At least, Qin Hao had not seen it before. If it were not for his special physique and eyes that were different from ordinary people, he could only tell when the attack was coming by his senses. He would not be able to see it. It turned out that the air-striking sect got its name from this. It was a pity that Great Ancestor Striking Kong had met Qin Hao. Otherwise, there were not many people in the same realm who could defeat the strike of air-striking palm, except for the unblemished divine monk Hui Tong. Yi Shuihan probably could not do it. Only Xiaogua, Si Sand, Gu Kuei and Lei Jiao, who were martial arts cultivators born with strong defense, could take it head-on. If it were Yu Qianyang and Chang Hello, they would have doubted their lives. Sword, come. Qin Hao pinched his sword fingers, and the sword will merged with the light of catastrophe. He pointed forward. Strands of light of catastrophe drifted out from his body, forming dense threads that pierced forward. Every time a thread flashed, there would be a deafening explosion. Everyone saw from afar that in the space between Great Ancestor Striking Kong and Tribulation Sword Emperor, countless rays of light exploded repeatedly. It was extremely turbulent like a storm. Mixed in such an attack, even Yu Biechio, Tai Sui Emperor, and Nieli would be crippled if not killed. Everyone was shocked. This attack was too terrifying. Palm of all heavens! Great Ancestor Striking Kong saw that Qin Hao had withstood it. None of the palm forces could break through the blockade of sword qi. He roared and raised one of his palms above his head. Thousands of warriors around him imitated Great Ancestor Striking Kong's action and also raised one of their palms above their heads. They resonated with each other, and the terrifying light of the palm shrouded the world. Then, the palm qi of countless phantoms madly converged into Great Ancestor Striking Kong's palm. The light in his palm was enormous, like a mountain. Then, the palm slammed down as if it could destroy all heavens. Qin Hao smiled faintly. Seeing all this, he also raised his sword fingers to the sky. Countless beams of light of catastrophe snaked up from his body and condensed into a divine sword. The sword light rushed into the sky and went against the momentum. With a boom, the giant palm that was pressing down was smashed into pieces. Both renhuangs are so strong. All the warriors in Nanjiang witnessed the whole process. Their blood was boiling. It had been many years since they had seen such strong cultivators fight. You took the palm of all heavens of Old Man head-on. You are worthy of the title Sovereign of Catastrophe Sword. The earth-shaking sound slowly dissipated. Great Ancestor Striking Kong said coldly. Qin Hao's sword was sharper than he had imagined. I don't care if I'm worthy of the title, but I don't know if Great Ancestor Striking Kong is worthy of the title as well, Qin Hao said with a smile. 877 Hao Shu. Go ahead and try. Nie Rong stepped forward heavily. His imperial might shook the sky. 3 swords, Qin Hao said. I will only use 3 swords. If you can continue to stand and talk to me, Qin Hao paused. His eyes swept down and fell on Zhang Bieqiu and the other 2. He pointed at them and said, not only will I not intervene, but the 3 leaders of Haotian Taoism will also demonstrate in public that they eat feces while standing upside down. Why do you want us to eat feces? Shi Yongnian looked at Zhang Bieqiu and Bo Shang. If you have the ability, then make Chu San eat feces as well. The one fighting Nie Rong right now is you, Shi Yongnian, Zhang Bieqiu said. Who told you to talk too much? Bo Shang gloated as if eating feces had nothing to do with him. 3 swords? Ha ha! What a boast! Come, come, come. This old man can't wait to enjoy the wonderful demonstration of the 3 leaders of Haotian Taoism. Great Ancestor Striking Kong patted his chest with one hand, indicating that he would stab there viciously. He would definitely make Nie Rong feel pain. Whoosh! The ear-piercing sound of the sword pierced the void. Without any warning, Qin Hao narrowed his eyes and a beam of light flew out. It was a sword. Nieli didn't know how he managed to block it. It was too fast, and his mind was blank. He instinctively placed the 7 Kills Pagoda in front of his chest to protect his chest. In an instant, his body trembled as if his internal organs had been shaken. An indescribably sharp sword chi pierced through the 7 Kills Pagoda and tore his body apart. A mouthful of blood gushed up his throat. With a bang, Ancestor Yi Kong was thrown back, and he almost fell on his butt. Good reaction. First sword. Qin Hao stepped forward. A violent sword whirlwind rose around him. Countless beams of light shot out from the whirlwind, whistling as they flew forward. Great Ancestor Striking Kong had just swallowed the blood rushing to his throat. His face was filled with shock. He didn't have time to think. He raised his hand and slapped forward. The 1,000 phantoms behind him also slapped out crazily according to his will. The dense palm prints completely covered the space. Poochie, poochie, poochie. It was as if countless palms were pierced through. Beams of light penetrated through Great Ancestor Striking Kong's body. Along with that, more and more sword wounds appeared on his face, neck and body. His dignified robe was torn apart by the light. His neat white hair became shorter and shorter. Spots appeared on his head. His legs felt heavy and blood flowed down his thighs. Finally, with a plop, the sword chi pierced through his right knee. Great Ancestor Striking Kong screamed and knelt down on one knee. How can he be so strong? Emperor Taisui said in shock. They were evenly matched a moment ago, but in the next second, Great Ancestor Striking Kong was crushed. Great Ancestor. Nieli saw the miserable state Great Ancestor Striking Kong was in, and his heart was in his throat. Qin Hao didn't stop. He continued to move forward. The closer he got, the fiercer the light of catastrophe became. Great Ancestor Striking Kong looked as if he had been ravaged by a storm. His face was covered in blood. He knelt down before Qin Hao. His eyes were filled with towering anger. He roared and integrated the power of Ren Huang into the imperial implement. Suddenly, the 7 Kills Pagoda burst into a violent storm. In an instant, it wiped out all the light of catastrophe and protected Nie Rong in the storm. There is still the third sword, borrowing sword from the heavens. Qin Hao raised his sword finger above his head. The heart method of the sword clan in his body was activated. His sword will became more and more majestic. His will merged into the boundless void and seemed to resonate with the heavens. Beams of sword light of the great path flew from all directions like shooting stars. They gathered in the sky and formed a giant sword that was even more majestic than the peak of the path. Qin Hao pointed his finger at Great Ancestor striking Kong. The giant sword whistled down from the sky and pierced straight down, bringing with it an extremely long shadow of light. It was extremely shocking. Peak Ren Huang. Nie Rong was in the storm of slaughter. He looked up at the sky, and his spiritual soul trembled. This power was beyond his limit. Even if he activated the top-grade Imperial implement, he couldn't withstand it. When he looked at Qin Hao again, his expression changed. He was so shocked that his liver and guts were about to burst. Boom! The giant sword fell down and went straight into the storm. The overbearing sword might shattered the storm. The endless sword will twisted and killed. Fragments of the 7 Kills pagoda slowly fell from the sky. The materials used to forge the top-grade Imperial implement were so dazzling that the spectators felt as if their hearts were being shattered by the sword in the sky. Whoosh! Whoosh! Amidst an incomparably heavy snort, Great Ancestor striking Kong's eyes were incomparably shocked. It was as if he had just taken a trip to the gates of hell. Nie Rong didn't die from this sword. It wasn't that Qin Hao held back, but because at this time, an incomparably noble and luxurious palanquin was slowly descending from the sky. A platinum radiance enveloped Nie Rong. The power of Emperor Yuan saved his life. What's supposed to come has finally come. Zhu Biechio looked up at the sky and watched the palanquin float down. Ever since he saw the 7 Kills pagoda in Nie Rong's hands, he knew that that person from the striking Kong sect had returned. He was invited back by Great Ancestor striking Kong. It seemed that today, the Dao sect still couldn't escape this calamity. Sherdong couldn't be saved. Chapter 1684. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Qian Ning's Wet Nur South Sky Peaks Tribulation Sword Emperor and Great Elder striking Kong didn't fight for long. They each used 3 moves, but the process was thrilling. Nie Rong's first attack was a test. The second attack was earth-shattering. The third attack suppressed the heavens. All 3 attacks were blocked by Tribulation Sword Emperor. Everyone thought that the balance would be maintained. The 2 emperors were equal in cultivation. No matter who lost, the winner wouldn't have an easy time. However, what happened next was completely unexpected. When it was Li Chuzin's turn, he unleashed 3 sword attacks. The first one caught Great Ancestor striking Kong off guard, and the second one caused Nie Rong to fall to his knees. He was in such a sorry state that he was powerless to defend himself. Even though he managed to survive the sword rain with the help of his supreme grade Emperor weapon, the 7 Kills pagoda was still shattered by Li Chuzan when the third sword arrived. The sword clan's unique skill, borrowing swords from the heavens. The warrior gathered the momentum of heaven and earth and resonated with his own sword will. This sword made the warriors of the 3 sects of Nanjiang witness the power of Tribulation Sword Emperor. It would be unforgettable. Great Elder striking Kong didn't realize until now that the enemy he faced had reached the peak of the Renhuang Plain. He vaguely released Renhuang will that could control the power of heaven and earth. His ability was beyond the limit of Renhuang. He was probably only 1 step away from the Imperial path. Even with a top-level Imperial weapon, Nie Rong couldn't compete with him. Borrowing the momentum of heaven and earth, and controlling the momentum of heaven and earth were 2 completely different martial arts concepts. The latter was like a fake Imperial Emperor with 1 foot in the Imperial realm. Nie Rong was only in the 6th Renhuang Plain. Everyone thought that after this sword attack, today's matter would be settled. The ancient mountain of the Way had withstood the test of the storm again. Even great elder Striking Kong thought he was dead for sure. Yet, under such circumstances, another mysterious supreme being descended from the sky and overturned the Strike Air faction's defeat. Moreover, this supreme being was unimaginably strong. Nanjiang City could not be said to be prosperous. In the 15 counties of Nanjiang, there had not been such a grand scene of cultivators like today for many years. The Renhuang of the three sects had all arrived. Great ancestor Striking Kong had suppressed the three Taoist sovereigns with the best imperial weapon in his hand. He was extremely domineering, but he was crushed by Tribulation Sword Emperor, whose alias was Li Chusan. Unforeseen events happened one after another. Accidents always happened in the next second. Those with weak hearts could not hold on any longer. Until now, an imperial emperor had arrived. Nanjiang City welcomed a great figure who stood at the top of the Water Jade Holy Empire's pyramid. Above the void, a large palanquin with black curtains fluttering in the wind descended. The palanquin gave off a solemn and dignified feeling. Seeing the palanquin, Zhan Biqiu, Shi Yongnian, and Bo Shang felt as if they had fallen into a cold abyss. They could no longer summon up the slightest bit of fighting spirit. The person in the palanquin was like a god that ruled over the Water Jade Holy Empire. Qin Hao naturally noticed the interference of outsiders. Like everyone else, he looked up and saw that the palanquin was very large. It was completely black, like a pitch-black coffin. However, it was flowing with a platinum luster, giving people a deep sense of oppression. Furthermore, each of the four corners of the palanquin was accompanied by a beautiful lady. The four ladies had yuan venerate auras surging around their bodies, as if they were carrying the palanquin. All of them had extraordinary temperaments, and were tall and slender. Even their elegant fairy robes couldn't hide their curvaceous and sexy figures. These ladies were obviously not simple. If he hadn't guessed wrong, they must have come from the Water Jade Holy Palace. After all, there had been similar ladies supervising the recruitment ceremony of the three sects at the Martial Plaza of Nanjiang City. Later, that group of fairies had gone to the South Sky Peak, but had been chased away by the Dragon Spirit Dharma projection. The four ladies carrying the palanquin were the same type as the Water Jade Fairy who had visited the South Sky Peak. However, the latter's cultivation, appearance, and inner bearing were all superior to the four ladies in front of him. Even so, it was enough to show that the person in the palanquin had an extraordinary status. In the Water Jade Holy Empire, how many people would dare to order the Water Jade Fairy of the Water Jade Holy Palace to carry a palanquin? The black-curtained palanquin slowly floated down and stopped in front of ancestor Zhan Kong. The four Water Jade Fairies carrying the palanquin all had cold, emotionless faces. Perhaps they had secretly witnessed the battle before, but now that they had appeared, they still had cold expressions on their faces, regardless of whether they were facing ancestor Zhan Kong, Taisui Sovereign, Zhan Kong Dao Emperor, or the three sovereigns of the Dao sect. They didn't have the slightest bit of emotion, let alone respect, just because the other party was a human sovereign. It was as if the human sovereigns in their eyes were no different from ordinary people. Only when they looked at Qin Hao did the eyes of the four Water Jade Fairies show a rare ripple of emotion. However, there was no respect, only curiosity. The fact that the Tribulation Sword Emperor had flown to the South Sky Peak with his extraordinary swordsmanship had long attracted the attention of the higher-ups of the Water Jade Holy Palace. Everyone in the Holy Palace knew about it. Moreover, Fairy of 100 Flowers, who was ranked 5th, had personally led a team to the South Sky Peak to visit the Tribulation Sword Emperor on behalf of the Holy Palace. As for the result, everyone knew. They didn't even go to the South Sky Peak and returned in disappointment. Fairy of 100 Flowers' status was much higher than these four. After all, it was the first time they had seen the Tribulation Sword Emperor in person. Naturally, they were curious. However, after witnessing the power of Qin Hao's swordsmanship and how he had crushed ancestor Zhang Kong, they could understand why Fairy of 100 Flowers' visit had failed. The Tribulation Sword Emperor was indeed qualified to be proud. He had one foot in the Emperor's path. No wonder he had attracted the attention of the higher-ups and elders. Greetings, Granny C. As the geniuses landed, Ancestor Zhang Kong, Emperor Taisui, Emperor Zhang Kong, the 3 emperors of the Taoist sect, and even the countless martial artists in the distant void bowed respectfully. Granny C of the Water Jade Holy Palace. Granny C had a very special status in the Holy Palace. She was a servant in name, but in reality, she was equivalent to the mother of the Water Jade Empress. Every Water Jade Holy Maiden had been raised by Granny C since childhood. She was their wet nurse or wet nurse. Fairy of Qianning, who had met Qin Hao, was naturally among them. There were no men in the Water Jade Holy Palace. The higher-ups of the empire were all women. Some especially talented children, once selected to enter the Holy Palace, would no longer have any relationship with their family the day they left home. From then on, the children would belong to the Water Jade Empress. Even if their biological parents saw them, they could only silently bless them and force themselves not to acknowledge them. However, the children who were brought to the Holy Palace would be taken care of by Granny C. There was more than one Granny C in the Holy Palace. There were many others. Moreover, all of them had excellent physiques, and could be said to be the most outstanding women in the Water Jade Holy Palace. After drinking their milk, the children of the Holy Palace's physical condition from childhood would far surpass their peers. There were no men in the Holy Palace. Granny C could not give birth, and could not provide milk. This became a kind of trouble, or even a shackle. The only solution was to let Granny C give birth, and have sex with men. Of course, that was only a process. Granny C would not have any feelings and would passively endure everything. Because men were not allowed to exist in the Holy Palace, how to deal with those men after the event was naturally to kill them and let them die in pleasure. After all, they were only tools. The masters of the prided sons had naturally experienced this. It could be said that from the moment Granny C of the Holy Palace accepted her fate, she was destined to be cold-blooded for the rest of her life. She would not have any feelings for any man, because each of her hands was stained with the blood of men, and even the blood of her loved ones. However, they had personally ended each other, cutting off the fantasies of a young girl in her prime, and also cutting off a lifetime of feelings. Although they were cold-blooded, they were also universal in love. This was because they had raised generations of Water Jade Empresses and made indelible contributions to the glory of the Holy Palace. Granny C had dedicated her life without regret. Cold-blooded, universal in love. It was very complicated but also very simple. Now, the Granny C who had arrived in Nanjiang City was from the Nie clan. She was the younger sister of Patriarch Nie Rong. What Qin Hao did not expect was that Qian Ning was one of the sacred maidens she had raised. She was also the most important one. Granny Nie could have her current status in the Holy Palace and be carried out by the Water Jade Fairy because of Qian Ning. After all, Qian Ning was the chief disciple of the current Water Jade Empress and the disciple she was most proud of. A mother's child was the most important. It could be imagined that Granny Nie had raised Qian Ning and was her nanny. This person was very respected in the Holy Palace. Once Qian Ning succeeded the position of Empress, Granny Nie would be second only to one person: the Nine Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 1685. In the vast land of the Tao Mountain, everyone bowed to the sedan. Patriarch Ji Kong did the same. He didn't dare to be disrespectful just because the owner of the sedan was his sister. Nie Sippo had entered the sacred palace and was a member of the sacred palace. Although she didn't completely cut ties with her clan like the Saintess, she still needed to be respected. No need to be so polite. A calm voice came from the sedan in the boundless space. The cultivators on the ground and in the void stood up straight. Sister, why didn't you return to the sacred palace? Patriarch Jikong asked. Before he attacked the Tao sect, he did send a letter to the sacred palace and asked to see Nye Sipo. She came as promised and gave him the 7 Kills Pagoda. Nye Rong had the 7 Kills Pagoda and thought that the trip would be smooth. Unexpectedly, Li Chu-san appeared out of nowhere. Not only was he defeated, but the tower was also destroyed. Nye Sipo happened to see it. Nye Rong felt that he had lost his face. If I really went back, you would be in the arms of the Nye family's ancestors. The voice in the sedan scolded. Nye Rong's face turned red as he glared at Qin Hao. Patriarch Jikong really couldn't keep his integrity. No one dared to interrupt, and Nye didn't dare to say anything. After scolding Patriarch Jikong, the proud son moved forward and stopped in front of Qin Hao. Junior, didn't you use too much strength just now? Third day. Inside is Saintess Qian Ning's nanny, Nye Sipo of the Sacred Palace. A voice transmission drifted into Qin Hao's ears. It was Ji Biechio's reminder. Qin Hao wanted to retort that it was none of his business, but it turned out that Qian Ning's nanny was inside the sedan. His heart skipped a beat. Someone familiar. Cough cough. Senior is right. I didn't control my strength and must have scared Senior Nye Rong. I apologize. Qin Hao cupped his hands at Patriarch Jikong. He could ignore others, but he had to respect Qian Ning. After all, they had gone through thick and thin together. She even helped him destroy the Xianyuan family. Since the proud son was Qian Ning's nanny, Qin Hao naturally treated her as his senior and should respect her. Humph! Patriarch Striking Kong swung his sleeve viciously at Qin Hao. His sleeve was already in tatters after being ravaged by the sword Qi. As a result, his entire sleeve was flung away, leaving him completely naked. Fortunately, he was quick enough to retrieve a set of robes from his spatial ring with a red face. Otherwise, he would be too ashamed to face anyone. I'm the Tao Tribulation's Sword Emperor, Yang Qi said. Big Sis' holy daughter Many Flowers came to visit, but refused to meet. Who could have guessed that she'd submit to Granny C? At this moment, a woman on the left side of the palanquin sneered. Senior is an emperor-level cultivator with a broad heart and benevolence. You have contributed greatly to the glory of the sacred palace, and even raised a genius like Saintess Qian Ning. This Li naturally respects you, Qin Hao said solemnly. He glanced at her and asked, How should I address you, fairy? Shimeng. The girl raised her head and said. Her name was given by Nye Sipo. Oh, Qin Hao dragged his voice. Never heard of it. You. The girl was so angry that she raised her eyebrows. What a glib tongue. Come up here and praise me. Don't think that I'll let you go with just a few words of praise. A voice came from the palanquin. Junior's words come from the bottom of my heart. I don't mean to praise you. I think you're worthy of being called a meritorious official of the sacred palace. Qin Hao said solemnly. As the nanny who raised a friend, he naturally had to speak nicely and praise her whenever he could. After all, there would be a time when he had to repay her. All right, my time is limited. I need to return to the sacred palace as soon as possible. Since you respect me so much, I'll let Nye Dong and Nye Rong attack Empty Mountain. The voice in the palanquin said. Nye Dong. Qin Hao was stunned. Nye Biechio and the other two were also stunned. From today onwards, Shi Dong of the Tao sect will be surnamed Nye. Don't worry. After he leaves, Nye Rong will take care of him like family. I guarantee on the sacred palace that nothing will happen to that child. His future will only get better and better, Nye Sipo said. In a simple sentence, Shi Dong's surname was changed from Nye to Nye. He was born in the Nye clan and had nothing to do with the Tao sect. Senior, this is inappropriate. The Shi clan's ancestral spirits are all in the Tao mountain. If you kidnap a descendant to the Nye clan, you're taking away their bloodline and cutting off their bloodline. Qin Hao didn't agree. If it was Shi Zhenhua, he wouldn't have any objections. Shi Dong had inherited Shi Mu's bloodline and was Shi Mu's only descendant. There was no room for discussion. Senior, our Dao sect has been declining for so long and Shi Dong has finally awakened his ancestral bloodline. Please have mercy on our Qilan Dao sect and don't make things difficult for us. Nye Biechio clenched his teeth. He waved his robe and knelt down on one leg. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang also knelt down. Voila! The thousands of Dao sect elders, deacons, and disciples all knelt down and begged. A dissatisfied voice came from the palanquin. The atmosphere seemed a bit suffocating. You don't agree? I'm thinking for Nye Dong's future. As the Saint Palace's Granny C, the Nye clan was able to rise so quickly because of her. After all, behind her was the strongest power in the Water Jade Empire. She wanted Shi Dong to join the Nye clan out of goodwill. Did the Dao sect not appreciate it? It's not that we don't agree, but that we can't agree. Qin Hao said. What was the difference between this and kidnapping other people's children? Forgive me for not agreeing, Nye Biechio replied. His will was the will of the Dao sect. In the past, the Saint Palace only took away talented girls. Now they didn't even let off men. It was too overbearing. Although Nye Sippo didn't represent the Saint Palace and Shi Dong couldn't enter the Saint Palace, Ji Biechio might really consider letting Shi Dong go. After all, becoming a disciple of the Water Jade Empress was akin to ascending to the heavens in a single bound. However, Nye Sippo wanted Shi Dong to change his surname to Nye because she wanted to kidnap him and give him to the Void Striking sect. It seems like I'm too polite and you think I'm easy to bully. Will you be satisfied if I forcefully take the inheritance and turn Shi Dong into a cripple? Nye Sippo's tone turned cold. Try it, Dong. Qin Haochao took a step forward. Suddenly, dense sword qi appeared in the air. The sword qi was arranged in an orderly manner, like the flashing of fish scales. Under the sunlight, it emitted an extremely sharp light. Formation with a thought. The goddess from the sacred palace named Shimen cried out in surprise. This method. Third year, don't be rude. Nye Biechio saw this and the three of them flew over. They opened their arms and stood in front of Qin Hao in the sedan. Was he crazy? Fighting with Nye Sippo was equivalent to declaring war on the Saint Palace. The Water Jade Holy Empire dominated the southern world because of the Water Jade Sacred Palace. Even if it was a long time ago when the Dao sect was at its peak, it would be extremely cautious when facing such an enemy. Moreover, the Dao sect's current strength was not even 1/10,000th of the past. Once they resisted, it would be like smashing an egg against a rock. Sword Dao Fake Emperor. Good. I don't know how many years have passed. I almost forgot how to fight. The spirit of the younger generation is praiseworthy. Forget it, I won't force you. But you hurt my brother first. I must return those 3 swords. The master of the geniuses seemed to be worried about something. She paused for a few seconds and said, 3 palms. After 3 palms, if you can still stand and talk to me, I, Nye Sippo, will turn around and leave. Do you dare? Chapter 1686. Strike Kong Sect, Taoism, and Tai Sui Mountain were all under the Water Jade Palace's jurisdiction. They were under the protection of the Empress of Water Jade. If the Sacred Palace needed help, the 3 sects would also help. Any conflict between the 3 sects was a matter of the lower-level forces. No matter how much trouble they caused, the Sacred Palace would not interfere. As a mother, she had to be fair. Nye Sippo was now a member of the Sacred Palace. Giving Nye Rong a supreme-grade Emperor artifact was not too much considering that she was from the Nye clan. However, if she directly attacked Taoism, the situation would become serious. The 3 sects were all children. Losing any one of them would weaken the Sacred Palace. Once the Empress punished her, Nyesipo would not be able to escape punishment. Therefore, she could not go overboard. However, Qin Hao's 3 attacks showed that he wanted to kill. If Nyesipo did not block the last attack, her brother would have died under Qin Hao's sword. How could she let it go? Qin Hao floated quietly. Block 3 of her attacks? His intention was to stand up for Nierong and not give up on Sherdong's emperor's inheritance. Yes, he did want to get rid of great ancestor Strike Kong. Denda treated people with respect. If Nierong spoke nicely like Nieli, he did not plan to attack. However, the old bastard was too arrogant. He would not give up until he got the inheritance. In order to stabilize the Taoism's future, Qin Hao needed to kill the chicken to warn the monkey. If he killed great ancestor Strike Kong, who would dare to attack the Taoism in the South River region? Only then could he leave the Taoism with peace of mind. However, that was not important. He could not avoid Nyesipo's next 3 attacks. Why aren't you saying anything? Is the South River Tribulation Sword Emperor afraid? Weren't your 3 attacks very impressive? In Shiming's opinion, you're just bullying Senior Nierong because you have a higher cultivation level. The Tribulation Sword Emperor showed his true colors when he met Granny C. Shiming, who was beside the sedan, mocked. As Nyesipo's servant, she naturally stood on the side of the Nye clan. This was also for her future in the sacred palace. Fairy Shiming, right? Your name is not bad and your looks are not bad. It's just that your breath is too bad. Is it because of that your status in the sacred palace is lower than the other fairies? Qin Hao said coldly. Watch your mouth. She was a girl after all. Alright, 3 palm strikes it is. I will suppress the attack to the maximum range you can withstand. Either you take it or let Nyedong enter the Void Strike Mountain. I will give you half an incense stick's worth of time to consider, but not too long. I am very busy and my time is very precious. I need to get back to the Holy Palace as soon as possible. Nyesipo gave an ultimatum. If Qin Hao didn't accept it, Dao Sect would have to hand over Sherdong. I don't need half an incense stick's worth of time. I can tell you now. 3 palm strikes, take it. Qin Hao said. He did not hesitate to receive the 300 palms. Chu San, are you tired of living? Nyesipo is an Emperor Dao expert. Cui Biqiu said in alarm. Don't be stubborn. Let Little Dong attack the empty mountain first. Big Brother and I will immediately set off for the Holy Palace and beg the Emperor Lord for an explanation. Shi Yongyan's eyes were red. He leaned close to Qin Hao and whispered into his ear. They had personally experienced how strong Qin Hao's sword Dao was. The Tribulation Sword Sovereign's sword Dao was definitely invincible in the Emperor realm. But no matter how strong he was only half a step into the Emperor realm. A fake emperor was a fake emperor after all. Nyesipo had truly mastered the Emperor realm. As long as she used a trace of her rule force, Qin Hao was far from being able to contend with her. Judging from the old woman's aura, 3 palm strikes were very likely to cripple Li Chuji. Nieli, take Nyedong back to the Void Strike Mountain. Since Dao Sect didn't dare to take it, Nyesipo directly ordered the Void Strike Dao Emperor to capture Nyedong. Nieli took a step forward with a cold smile on his face. Previously, he had declared to the Tribulation Sword Sovereign that the Nye family was strong. Now, did he have a taste of it? Wait. Qin Hao also took a step forward and said to the proud son, Senior, make your move. Chu San, you mustn't. Cui Biqiu was so shocked that his expression changed drastically. They were really going against Emperor Yuan. Suppress Cui Biqiu. Qin Hao's expression froze, and sword light burst out from his eyes. Seeing this, Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang dragged Cui Biqiu away. Let go, I am the Dao Sect's sect master. Cui Biqiu struggled hard, but it was completely useless. At this moment all the martial artists were moved. The South Sky Peak's Tribulation Sword Sovereign actually wanted to take 3 palm strikes from Nyesipo with his Emperor Realm strength. He was really daring. The name of the Tribulation Sword Sovereign was very famous in Nanjiang City recently, but Nyesipo was an Emperor Realm powerhouse. How could he withstand the disparity between an Emperor Realm and an Emperor Realm? Many people were worried about this and felt that it was a pity. There were also people who were secretly happy. They wanted to see the Tribulation Sword Sovereign get beaten up, and the Taisui Sovereign was one of them. As for Grand Ancestor Ji Kong, his nose was almost reaching the top of his head. It wasn't that he couldn't defeat Li Chuji, but that Li Chuji was too sinister and hid his cultivation too deeply. Grand Ancestor Ji Kong was suppressed by his realm. If they were in the same realm, the Tribulation Sword Sovereign would have died countless times in his hands. First palm strike. As soon as the voice fell, a figure suddenly flew out of the palanquin. As the black curtain fluttered, it was like a platinum light shadow. Its speed was incomparably fast. Light flowed in the palm, wrapping around Dilly and slamming heavily into Qin Hao's chest. Almost as soon as Nyesipo appeared, she directly landed in front of Qin Hao. Everyone finally saw Nyesipo's true appearance. She was about 30 years old, beautiful, mature, and had the nobility of a sacred palace woman on her face. She was completely different from what they had imagined. Qin Hao was also slightly stunned. He thought that Nyesipo should be an old woman with a hunched back and a face full of wrinkles. He didn't expect her to take such good care of herself. She was even more beautiful than Shimeng and the other 3 girls. Her temperament was also incomparable. She is someone who has stepped into the Emperor Realm, after all. Qin Hao instantly regained his senses. Nyesipo's cultivation was at the 3rd stage of the Yuan Arch Realm. When a martial artist entered the Arch Realm, they no longer relied too much on heaven and earth spirit energy. Instead, they relied on their Tao to nourish their body. Many Dharch powerhouses, including the Dharch Lords, looked the same as when they were young. As for Patriarch Striking Kong, his cultivation was still at the Emperor Realm. He still needed to be nourished by heaven and earth spirit energy to maintain his youthful appearance. This had a great impact on the cultivation of the human sovereign realm. Therefore, he couldn't bear to waste his energy on his appearance. The light of tribulation flashed, and a sword curtain appeared in front of him out of thin air. Even though he knew that Nyesipo couldn't hurt him, Qin Hao still had to put on an act for outsiders to see. After all, he had to protect Xian Ning's nanny's face. But, as expected, the palm passed through, and the sword curtain shattered. With a loud bang, Nyesipo's palm landed squarely on Qin Hao's chest. The platinum Dilly's palm wreaked havoc, and a majestic force penetrated his body, sending him flying. However, Nyesipo was shocked to find that Qin Hao was as immovable as a mountain. It was as if her palm didn't hit a human body, but a 10,000-year-old rock. When the platinum Dharch aura came into contact with the Tribulation Sword Sovereign's body, it directly collapsed. Even the bones in her hand felt a faint pain. He's actually so hard? Nyesipo was obviously shocked, and so was Qin Hao. Since his rebirth, he had been cultivating the indestructible samsara art. His physical body surpassed that of ordinary people. Later, he became a demigod and was practically indestructible. Now, he had already dispersed the true qi in his body and stood there completely without any defense. Even so, Nyesipo's attack was no different from scratching an itch. Even Qin Hao himself didn't expect that after 8 years of being tempered by the 5-spirit earth spirit energy of the South Sky Peak, his physical body would be strengthened to such an extent. This was the power of a flawless Dharch. His Dharch intent was flawless, his laws were flawless, and his Dharch body didn't have any weaknesses. Even if he dispersed the true qi in his body and opened up his defense, Emperor Yuan's palm couldn't move him at all. Chapter 1687. The scene became weird. Everyone saw Nyesipo suddenly fly out of the sedan and attack with her palm. Calamity Sword Sovereign took the attack with his chest straight. He was as steady as a mountain. Did Nyesipo take this attack seriously? Why did it feel so weak? Especially after Qin Hao was slapped, he didn't move at all. Nyesipo's hand was still on his chest. The two of them looked at each other with a dazed expression. No matter how one looked at it, it felt strange and ambiguous. Cough, cough. Thank you for showing mercy on the first attack. Qin Hao coughed. Your body is quite sturdy. Only then did Nyesipo regain her senses. She took a few steps back and looked at Qin Hao with a serious expression. Of course, she didn't show mercy. Since she promised to restrain her power to his limit, she would definitely use all her strength. It would be best if she could knock him down in one hit. Although she didn't use any martial arts techniques, Nyesipo thought that Qin Hao wouldn't be able to withstand her attack with just her Emperor Qi. However, she was shocked. Calamity Sword Sovereign's physical body was so strong that it was beyond her imagination. How did he manage to break through her attack with his physical body? Whoosh! Below, Jean Bietio and the other two stood in the training hall and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Nyesipo was kind and didn't use too much strength. Her first attack was to test Chu San's condition so that she wouldn't kill him later. Nyesipo was actually a good person. The elders and disciples also breathed a sigh of relief, especially Sherdong and Yin Qingqing. If Nyesipo really killed their master, they would definitely fight with their lives. Senior, please teach me the second attack, Qin Hao said. He was still very polite. After all, she was the nanny who raised Qian Ning. However, he was thinking about how to deal with it. He wanted to make himself look worse to show that Nyesipo was powerful. If he could take the 3 attacks peacefully, Qian Ning's nanny wouldn't look too bad. Well, he might as well hurt himself. Nyesipo was a 3rd stage Dao attainment stage 3rd stage Dao attainment stage. Based on her cultivation, it would be difficult for her to injure Qin Hao if she didn't unleash her full power. Even if Qin Hao didn't resist, it would be difficult for her to attack him. On the other hand, Qin Hao was more worried that Nyesipo would suffer from internal injuries. Qin Hao would only be affected if his opponent used his Emperor's will law to its fullest extent. However, as a senior figure, he would not act so viciously against a junior Renhuang. Empty palm, shouted Nyesipo. Above her mature body, dazzling imperial light flowed. Strands of terrifying platinum qi gathered in her palm. Instantly, the space rumbled. Borrowing the power of the Great Path, her palm qi resonated with the heavens and earth. This palm contained the power of a martial skill. They're getting serious. That's good. Qin Hao smiled in his heart. The stronger Nyesipo's palm strike, the easier it would be for him to pretend to be injured. As the saying goes, pretending to be an expert is easy, but pretending to be a weakling is simply too difficult. 1. There was a terrifying rumble in the void. Nyesipo thought that Qin Hao was mocking her. She raised her palm and increased the strength of her palm strike by 30%. Dense illusory images of women appeared in the space. Just like great ancestor Qigong's empty palm, the illusory images surrounded Nyesipo as if they were worshipping her. However, the difference was that Nyesipo's might was stronger. The void was filled with illusory images of women. The scale was extremely large, no less than tens of thousands. Great ancestor Qigong could not compare at all. Moreover, she didn't need to gather the palm energy of all the illusory images. She directly struck forward. The tens of thousands of illusory images of women in the space also followed Nyesipo's action and struck toward Qin Hao. Rumble! The void seemed to be collapsing. There was no trace of palm radiance, but the space was shattering bit by bit. The dense spiderweb was like lightning and instantly swallowed Qin Hao. There was a terrifying explosion in the space. Qin Hao exclaimed in his heart. At the same time, He pretended to resist and increased the sword Dao Gang Qi around him. On the other hand, his sea of Qi was flowing in reverse. In the blink of an eye, his primordial Qi was flowing in reverse. It hit his meridians 5 times before he forced out a mouthful of blood. His body was like a kite with a broken string. With a terrifying explosion, he flew out and crashed into the Taoist temple. The Taoist temple was turned into ruins. What a terrifying palm strike! The Taisui emperor widened his eyes. Even someone as strong as Li Chuji couldn't withstand a single blow. Nye Sippo was indeed an emperor realm expert. He relied on his higher cultivation level to barely defeat the old man. It was an unfair victory. Great ancestor Qigong said proudly. He didn't forget to teach the Qigong Taoist emperor, Nye Li, did you see it clearly? This is the true essence of our Nye clan's empty palm strike. No so-called genius in the same cultivation level can withstand it. In Nye Rong's eyes, Nye Sippo's palm strike was at most at the level of a fake emperor. She was at the same cultivation level as Li Chuji. However, Li Chuji was beaten to a pulp. Master! Junior 3. Jean Biechio, Sherdong, and the others watched as Qin Hao was crushed by the palm strike. The Taoist hall was reduced to ruins and the Taoist peak was shaken. They couldn't help but be shocked. The power of the palm strike was so great that it was obviously beyond the limit of what Qin Hao could withstand. In an instant, everyone in the Taoist sect rushed toward the Taoist hall. Even if Tribulation Sword Sovereign was defeated, they should at least save him immediately. Bang! Just as the Taoist sect's people lifted their feet, a figure flashing with sword light broke through the sky from the ruins of the Taoist hall. It was extremely fast and returned to everyone's sight, standing in front of Nye Sippo. The second palm strike. Thank you for showing mercy. Qin Hao pretended to cough. As he coughed, he covered his heart with his palm. Dilly kept attacking his meridians in his palm. He coughed out mouthful after mouthful of blood. He looked extremely miserable. Master! Sherdong's eyes were filled with tears. In order to protect him, the sect leader, his fellow disciples, the elders, and his master had sacrificed so much. Master, don't hold on anymore. I don't want to see you die. Yin Qingqing cried. The moment Li Chuji transformed into Tribulation Sword Sovereign, she felt that her master was extremely powerful. However, looking at him now, he was so weak and powerless. Old Lady Nye was too ruthless. I can still continue. The third palm strike. Senior, please teach me. Qin Hao coughed for a while and barely recovered. However, the qi around him was extremely chaotic. He looked at Nye Sippo with a pale face. Your bones are really tough. Shiming squeezed through her teeth. He could still crawl back after being injured like this. Nye Rong was defeated by you. His reputation in this life was not in vain. Although you haven't entered the martial emperor realm, your sword intent is as tough as steel. Your body and bloodline are extremely dense. Even those who have just entered the martial emperor realm may not be stronger than you. Nye Sippo took a deep breath and said, It seems that I have underestimated you again. You are now able to withstand 49 martial emperor tribulations. What? Emperor Taisui was shocked. According to Nye Sippo's words, Li Chuji was strong enough to become a martial emperor. However, his cultivation was still lacking. Once he attracted the martial emperor tribulations, even the martial emperor tribulations would not be able to do anything to him. This was an expert who would become a martial emperor. Emperor Taisui's expression suddenly changed. There were many human sovereigns in the 4 regions of the divine wilderness, but there were very few who had become martial emperors. And Li Chuji's future was to become a martial emperor. Maybe I should reconsider. Li Chuji might be able to tie with me in the same realm. Ancestor Jikong's expression also became serious. Nye Li's heart trembled as he looked at the Nye family's ancestor. Was he serious? Tribulation Sword Sovereign, it's not easy for you to cultivate the sword Tao. The martial emperors of the sacred palace have already noticed you. If you are willing to hand over Sherdong and return with me, you will definitely be a martial emperor of the sacred palace. Why do you have to do this? Nyesipo suddenly cherished talent, but then she shook her head and sneered. Even if she did not want to fight, Tribulation Sword Sovereign might not appreciate it. Senior, please teach me the third palm. As expected, Qin Hao's attitude was as firm as before. For the Taoist sect, he would not retreat. At this moment all the martial artists were in awe. They all looked at Tribulation Sword Sovereign with solemn expressions. Even Nyesipo admitted that Li Chuji would definitely become a martial emperor. However, for the Taoist sect, he was willing to take another palm. Everyone knew that Nyesipo would not let Tribulation Sword Sovereign stand up for the third palm. It was equivalent to destroying his foundation and breaking his martial emperor path. Master. Sherdong faced the sky and knelt down. Chapter 1688. Creak. Jean Bietio clenched his fists, and his soul trembled. For the Tao sect, he was willing to cut off the imperial Tao. What kind of breadth of mind was this? Not to mention others, even if it was the three sect masters of the Tao sect, would they be able to do what Qin Hao did? Maybe they could, but they definitely wouldn't be so decisive and give up the imperial Tao sect without hesitation. Third day of the Lunar New Year, have you ever thought that after this palm strike, even the herbs in the medicinal garden will cry because no master will be able to take care of them like you do in the future? Perhaps it was his old illness acting up again, but Elder Yu suddenly sat down on the ground and cried bitterly, spitting out inauspicious words. No one tried to persuade him. The entire Tao sect mourned. The disciples might have the same thoughts as old man Yu. After the third palm strike, the Tao sect would no longer have Li Chuji. Just like the name of the Tribulation Sword Sovereign, he came and went quickly. You have to think carefully. If you use the third palm strike, I won't go easy on you. Nyesipo said coldly. Next, she would use the power of rules because Li Chuji's physique was so strong that it wasn't inferior to Emperor Yuan's. If I don't enter hell, who will? Qin Hao raised his head and looked at the sky, exuding a heroic spirit. Then, he lowered his head and shouted at Yin Qingqing, "Qingqing, take good care of your junior brother. Why do you always say this? Don't leave everything to me. I want you to live safely and take care of the two of us." Yin Qingqing raised her head, her throat choked. For 8 years, the words "take care of your junior brother" had been imprinted in her mind. It was like brainwashing. Her master had said it countless times, but today, Yin Qingqing felt unprecedented fear. Buzz. The space trembled. A majestic and unparalleled power radiated out boundlessly. It was as if an emperor was looking down on the common people. All the cultivators who were enveloped by this power felt as if they had become ants under the heavenly Tao. At this time, platinum light surged and bloomed from Nyesipo's body. It was extremely dazzling, revealing the true body of the Empress. Suffocating true meaning of the great Tao filled the air. Her majesty was unparalleled, as if a god had descended. Empty space. The platinum palm pierced through the void and whizzed towards Qin Hao. The terrifying power of the rules eroded everything and burned everything. The Void Shaker Law was formed from the Nye clan's Void Strike bloodline. When one was struck by the law of the Void Shaker Law, the body, soul, and even Tao inside of a cultivator would be completely devoured and transformed into nothingness as if they'd never appeared in the world. Qin Hao watched as the power of the nomological palm pressed down on him. His entire body was engulfed by the platinum brilliance. At that moment, his imperial body instinctively resisted. The platinum luster on the surface of his body flickered. Majestic Imperial will wanted to penetrate his body and devour the person who attacked him. However, he immediately suppressed it. First of all, Niesipo was Qian Ning's nanny. He could not hurt her. In addition, Qin Hao also wanted to verify whether his physical body could directly contend with the rule force of other emperors without using the rule force. According to the direction of martial arts cultivated by the Divine Palace's Migres Hall, the flawless Empyrean body he forged shouldn't have any blind spots. Strength of the same level shouldn't be able to break through it unless it was a higher-level divine Dao law. What's more, Niesipo's Dao-confirming power was actually weaker than Qin Hao by more than one level. She shouldn't be in any danger. Boom. Crack. Everyone watched as Li Chuji was engulfed by the platinum brilliance. A huge black hole with a radius of 100 meters appeared where he was standing. It was pitch black and deep, as though it was connected to another layer of space, a world that didn't belong to the divine wilderness continent. This was the first time the martialists of Nanjiang City witnessed the Emperor true power. It was so terrifying. At that moment, the Taisui Emperor was trembling violently. It was as though his body was about to shatter. Plop! Yin Qingqing fainted on the spot when she saw the doomsday-like scene. What kind of power was this? How could her master survive? Rest in peace. In your next life, don't enter my Dao sect again. Chiebiechio swung his robe and knelt on the ground. Calamity sending sword sovereign. Calamity sending sword sovereign. Shi Yongyan and Bo Shang chanted solemnly. Everyone from the Dao sect faced the huge black hole in the void and knelt down together. Shi Dong clenched his fists so hard that blood flowed through the gaps between his fingers. His eyes were filled with endless killing intent as he looked at Niesipo. Ha ha! A mere fake emperor is nothing much. Fairy Shiming sneered, completely forgetting that she was only a lower-level Yuan venerate and was still very far from the human ruler. Is it finally over? Shi Zhenhua, who was on the training ground below, looked up and suddenly felt very empty. In the past, he had always disliked Qin Hao and wished that this person would get out of the Dao Mountain as soon as possible. However, when this day finally came, his heart felt very heavy for some reason. Li Chuji had only been on the Dao Mountain for 8 years, yet he had still been able to achieve this. Shi Zhenhua had been born on the Dao Mountain since he was a child, but what had he done for the Dao sect? Perhaps none of the future disciples would think of him as a hero. On the contrary, even though Li Chuji had died, the next few generations of the Dao sect would never forget his battle. Hero. The calamity-sending sword sovereign was fully deserving of this title. Shi Zhenhua was rooted to the spot. His heart was at a loss. He might have really been wrong. High up in the sky, the huge black hole gradually closed. The shattered space was gradually repaired by the suppression of the sky path. However, just as Niesipo was about to order Nieli to bring everyone away for the second time, a tall figure gradually appeared in the slowly disappearing black hole. Everyone's hearts trembled violently as they stared at the figure in disbelief. Qin Hao's appearance was very ugly. His hair was messy, and his clothes were severely damaged. This time, he wasn't pretending. He was more or less affected by Emperor Yuan's rules, but the effect wasn't great. There were only traces of dark red scratches on the surface of his body, and his flesh wasn't damaged. As expected, Niesipo's rules weren't enough to break through the flawless body of an Empyrean. If Wei Tong was here, he might not even be able to break through the golden light. Of course, all of this was because Qin Hao didn't put up any defense. Impossible, there's actually such a thing? Niesipo was so shocked that her expression finally changed. Looking at the rule power that was gradually dissipating in her palm, she didn't show any mercy. But the Tribulation Sword Sovereign still managed to hold on. Master, Master! Shi Dong stepped on the sky with the water wind steps and flew towards Qin Hao like an arrow, sprinkling sparkling tears along the way. Third day, Elder. Everyone was shocked. Elder, you stopped crying and stared blankly at the sky. I can't believe it. Shi Yongyan rubbed his eyes fiercely with both hands. Beside him, Bo Shang suddenly roared excitedly. The tribulation sword sovereign is mighty. The tribulation sword sovereign is mighty. The tribulation sword sovereign is mighty. In an instant, these cheers were like waves, boiling over one wave after another. Not only the mountain of Dao, but the martial artists of Nanjiang City, who were watching the battle from afar, and even the people from Taisui Mountain and the Air Strike sect couldn't help but shout out. It was too shocking. If Li Chuji was also Emperor Yuan, no matter what the outcome of this battle was, everyone wouldn't be too surprised. After all, they were on the same level. However, he was only the human sovereign. A human sovereign withstood the Emperorian rules and didn't die. How shocking and determined was that? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. No matter how strong a martial artist's physical body is, even if they have the qualifications to survive the 49th stage of the Emperorian tribulation, they will never be able to stand up after falling into my rule power. There's a trap, there's a trap. Nye Sippo mumbled incoherently. The way she looked at Qin Hao changed. Faintly, it was filled with horror. No one in the world could directly contend with the Emperorian rules before breaking through to the Emperorian realm. This was an unchanging law since ancient times. No matter how heaven-defying a genius was, it was impossible to be so heaven-defying. Senior, thank you for showing mercy. This junior will remember this kindness in my heart. I will definitely go to the sacred palace to thank you another day. After the 3 palms, Qin Hao cupped his hands and bowed to Nye Sippo. He still didn't forget his etiquette. Withstand my Emperorian rules. I don't believe that you are a mere human sovereign. Get out of your true body and let me see what kind of monster you are. A fierce and ear-piercing roar shook the world. Nye Sippo was like a crazy woman who had lost her composure. The rules in her palms condensed again, and the platinum light around her body shone brightly. As she raised her hand, palm shadows filled the sky and pierced through the void. Fierce attacks bombarded forward like a torrential rain. How could a human sovereign bear the Emperorian rules? There's a trap, there's a trap. She was deceived. However, Shi Dong was using the wind steps and was rushing over. His speed was extremely fast and in an instant, he was sucked in by Nye Sippo's chaotic attacks. Chapter 1689. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the sky in shock. Many martial artists cried out in shock. The 3 palms had already passed. Nye Sippo should have stopped and left, but she didn't. Instead, she became even fiercer and her attacks became even more ferocious. In just an instant, she didn't just throw out 3 palms. Instead, she threw out hundreds of palms. The airflow in the sky became chaotic. The space continued to shatter. Under the corrosion of Nye Sippo's rule power, the palms pierced through the void. The void seemed to be peeled off layer by layer, revealing the darkness below. Anything that was affected by the rule power was turned into nothingness. The sky was filled with the rule power. In an instant, Qin Hao and Shi Dong were drowned. Ji Biqiu, Shi Yongnian, and Bo Shang couldn't help but scream in fear. Not good. Qin Hao saw that Shi Dong was in the middle of the rule power bombardment. Water-wind god stepped into the sky and stood in front of Shi Dong. His outstanding height gave his disciple a great sense of security. He supported himself with one hand and the sword intent in his body roared. Strands of platinum sword chi intertwined into a shield, turning into a pale platinum sword shield that blocked the rain of palms. No wonder, Sword Emperor. Nye Sippo was so angry that she laughed. Those 3 palms had made her question her own cultivation. It turned out that she had been wrong. She didn't see through Li Chuji's real body. This person wasn't a human sovereign, but a sword emperor. Senior Nye, you've gone too far. Qin Hao's face turned cold. It didn't matter what she did to him. Shi Dong was a cultivator of the Saint Realm. How could he accept the emperor's rule power? However, Nyesipo didn't care about the life and death of her junior and still attacked without hesitation. Master, don't be nervous. She can't hurt me, Qin Hao said. He tolerated it, but it didn't mean that he didn't have a temper. On the contrary, Denda's temper had always been extreme. Originally, he wanted to settle the matter peacefully. However, it only increased Nyesipo's arrogance. Until now, Qin Hao finally understood that the Calamity Sword Emperor alone couldn't suppress today's incident. It seemed that his second identity couldn't be hidden anymore. Dong didn't say anything else. He sensed that his master's temperament had changed. His master's aura was getting stronger and stronger. He was afraid that he would affect the other party. This is the first time in my life that I, Nyesipo, have been played by someone without knowing it. Your Excellency's means of deceiving everyone is brilliant. Since that's the case, let's fight. Let me see how many layers of Emperor's Tao you have attained. Nyesipo's monarch light shone again. She took a deep breath and launched another few hundred attacks with her palms. Qin Hao's shield started to crack. At this point, he still wanted to save some face for Qian Ning. However, Qian Ning did not give up. Her nomological attacks not only enveloped the master and disciple duo, but also seemed to radiate towards the Tao Mountain. Within the Tao Mountain were the weak and helpless disciples of the Tao sect. Nyesipo, if you don't stop, don't blame me for being merciless, Qin Hao warned sternly. It's better if you are merciless. An emperor should be merciless. Throw away your Calamity Sword Emperor appearance, and let me see what kind of extraordinary person you are. How dare you come to the Water Jade Holy Kingdom and play trick? Come, unleash your Emperor's Tao. Don't hold back against me. The originally dignified and graceful lady had lost all her poise. Nyesipo looked at the people of the Tao Mountain with a vicious gaze. Suddenly, her palms changed. Her nomological palms rained down like torrential rain. She wanted to see if Li Chuji would reveal his true identity. Run! The overwhelming palms rained down. The power of the nomological rules tore through the void. It was like the end of the world. Jiu Biechio was shocked. He, Shi Yongnian, and Bo Shang tried their best to get the disciples out of the mountain. However, how could the three lower Renhuangs be faster than an emperor? Under the cover of the emperor's will, their words and actions were law. With a thought, Nyesipo sealed the entire Tao Mountain. It was impossible for the Tao sect to escape. Boom! An extremely violent flame Tao might was released. The fire spread rapidly and covered the entire sky. The sky above the martialists of Nanjiang City turned into a terrifying pool of blood in an instant. In the boundless void, blazing demonic flames surged. Under the cover of the Red Lotus Tao Might, the Emperor's nomological rules did not exist. The palms raining down on the Tao Mountain dissipated. As the demonic flames burned, an even more majestic Emperor's will descended. Even the noble Emperor's aura that Nyesipo emitted was suppressed and destroyed. The martialists who were watching the battle in the void fell in batches. First, it was the Sky Origin ancestors, saints, monarchs, and finally Shimeng and the other three who were carrying the palanquin. Even Yuan Venerates couldn't stand in the air. They were all forced to the ground. It wasn't a deliberate attack. The flame Tao might that shrouded the void was too strong. It was so strong that the human sovereigns, Emperor Taisui, Emperor Striking Kong, and Patriarch Striking Kong could only tremble in fear. At the moment, Nyesipo's eyes were only filled with shock and fear. In front of her, an even more resplendent Emperor's brilliance bathed Li Chuji's body. His tall figure appeared even more imposing amid the brilliance. It was as if a great emperor powerhouse had descended and could devour the sun and moon. The faint luster of dragon scales flickered through Qin Hao's tattered clothes. His originally pitch-black hair was gradually covered in a layer of silver light. When the emperor's wings unfolded behind him and the 12 demonic feathers flapped, he was like a living demon god standing in the void, overlooking the entire Shui Yao nation and the entire south border of the East continent. "Kneel." A faint voice came from his mouth as he looked down at Nye Sippo with his emotionless and cold eyes. As Qin Hao spoke, the dignified lady of the sacred palace, whose legs trembled as she knelt before Qin Hao's feet. She did not even dare to raise her head. Nye Sippo's beautiful face was filled with humiliation. Tears kept flowing from her eyes. It was not that she wanted to kneel, but Qin Hao's emperor's will had invaded her divine soul. The tyrannical pressure that was comparable to an imperial lord's had ruthlessly crushed her will. The power hit her soul again, and she was completely unable to control her body. She wanted to see Qin Hao's real body? Now, she had gotten her wish. However, when she stripped away the Tribulation Sword Sovereign's outer appearance, she welcomed an unparalleled demon god that was comparable to an imperial lord. In the past, Dendu was a figure who had intimidated the 4 regions and 8 wasteland. He was regarded as the ruler of the East continent by the 5 worlds. His aura was even stronger than that of the Shui Yao Empress. In the face of such a mighty figure, Nye Sippo was as weak as a lamb and could only tremble. Not only her. The 2 words calmly spread out from the sky. The people within 1,000 miles of Dao Mountain and even the 15 counties of Nanjiang all knelt on the ground. The Taisui Emperor, the striking Dao Emperor, and the striking Ancestor were like 3 giant toads. They simply prostrated themselves on the ground and did not dare to move. "It's okay. Calm down. Nye Sippo has already knelt. I'm just a little human sovereign. Li Chuji won't pay attention to an ant-like existence like me." At this moment, the Taisui Emperor kept comforting himself. He was trying to soothe his overly frightened heart that almost stopped beating. It was too shocking. Who would have thought that Li Chuji, who was planting grass in the outer court of Taoism, was actually an imperial lord that was comparable to the current master of the Shui Yao Sacred Palace, the supreme female emperor. Zhang Bieqiu, Shi Yongyan, and Bo Shang were also so shocked that they could not breathe. The change was too sudden. Before they could escape from Dao Mountain with their disciples, 2 words fell from the sky. They knelt down without hesitation. However, when they looked up again, they found that Nye Sippo had knelt down at the feet of someone else. And that person was actually Li Chuji. Tribulation Sword Sovereign? No. Perhaps they should change their title and call him Tribulation Sword Sovereign. The space was so quiet that even the falling leaves could be heard. Nearly 1 million people did not even dare to fart, let alone breathe. Even if they had a fart, it was forcibly held in their intestines. The only sound that could be heard was a woman's sobbing. It was the sound of Nye Sippo's extremely humiliating tears. Chapter 1690. In the Water Jade Holy Empire, women's rights prevailed, and in ordinary households, women's status was higher than men. Nye Sippo was the Sippo of the Sacred Palace and the nanny of Saintess Qian Ning. How did she feel when she knelt before a white-haired man? But who could she blame? She asked for it. If she hadn't been so aggressive, she wouldn't have lost her dignity. Her kneeling was even more humiliating than ancestral patriarch Strike Kong's defeat. "Are you satisfied now?" Qin Hao looked down at her. Platinum will of the Great Path flowed around his body. The innate temperament of an emperor was proud and aloof. It was as if even the heavens were about to fall under his feet. Nye Sippo lowered her head and cried. She didn't say anything else. What else could she say? She wanted to see how many levels of Dao Li Chuji had proven. She didn't need to. She could see the number of halos under Qin Hao's feet. There were 7 Emperor halos, which represented the 7th level of Dao proving. Vaguely, there was a blurry figure forming at the outermost layer. It wouldn't take long for him to break through to the 8th level of Dao proving. He was infinitely close to Empress Shuiyao's cultivation. Nye Sippo was only at the 3rd level of Dao proving. What right did she have to talk to him? You made Nyesipo kneel and humiliated the people of the sacred palace. Don't be so lawless just because you have a higher level. The sacred palace has more. Before Fairy Shimeng could finish her words, slap! Qin Hao sent a palm strike whistling through the air, causing Precious Dream's body to spin 360 degrees in the air before crashing heavily into the ground. When she raised her head again, a bright red handprint had appeared on the left side of her face, and it was as striking as a birthmark. I ignored you not because I'm afraid, but because you don't even have the right to be looked at. What can the sacred palace do? Come, shout louder. Call your number 1 holy maiden Qian Ning over. Call all the elders over. It would be best if even Empress Shueiyao came. Please, shout as loud as you want. Gods and Buddhas all over the sky, come. I, Li Chusan, will say that if you frown in the slightest, my head will be twisted off for you to kick. Qin Hao shouted. His voice shook the heavens. Mad? When Dendi of the East Continent was angry, even Mad God had to admit defeat. You're just a mere servant girl. When facing someone stronger than you, it's best if you know how to show respect. That way you can live longer. After Qin Hao finished speaking, he no longer looked at Shimen Meng. Dende had never said that he would never hit a woman. After 2 lifetimes of recultivation, Dende had killed all kinds of people. Those that he had beaten were those that deserved to be beaten, and those that he had killed were those that deserved to be killed. He did not mind crushing a disgusting fly to death. Shimeng was prostrated on the ground, her head buried deep in the ground. The blood-red handprint on her face was incomparably glaring, and her entire body was trembling. She had long since forgotten the meaning of respect and reverence, having originated from the sacred palace. But today, Qin Hao's glance made her realize what she was. What kind of hero are you to bully a weak fairy from my holy palace? Don't go too far. Nyesipo lay in the void, her jade-like hands clenching tighter and tighter. However, the will of the way above her head did not allow her to get up. Are you even qualified to say that I'm going too far? Qin Hao sneered and casually waved his hand, dispersing the Emperor's might that was suppressing Nyesipo. Forget it, get lost. For the sake of Qianing, I won't kill you today. But I will not let this matter rest. Go back and pass a message to Qianing. Tell her to personally come over and apologize to me sincerely. Otherwise, once I step into the gates of the sacred palace, it won't be as simple as an apology. Get lost. Buzz. The blood-red color that swept across the sky quickly faded, and the Emperor's Tao might that was suppressing the Nanjiang heavens dissipated into nothingness. It was only at this moment that the millions of cultivators lying on the ground dared to breathe. They were like a group of suffocating beggars, opening their big mouths and greedily inhaling the sweet air. A large palanquin that was suffused with a platinum radiance crazily shuttled through the void and left in the direction of the sacred palace. The scene was completely different from when they first arrived. Nyesipo left with the 4 fairies in a sorry state as if she was running for her life. Qilin Dao sect, you colluded with Emperor Yuan from the outside world and disturbed the rule of the Holy Empire. Prepare to receive the punishment of the Emperor Lord. A voice resounded from the distant void. If the sacred palace thinks so, then so be it. My Dao sect will accept the challenge. Ji Biechio gathered his sovereign chi, clenched his fists, and directly shouted back. As soon as he shouted this sentence, Ji Biechio's soul trembled. Lingering fear emerged in his heart. What did he say just now? Accept the challenge of the sacred palace? It seems that he has also gone crazy. But it felt really good when he shouted. In the silent space, no one dared to make any sound. Only Ji Biechio's roar reverberated. The millions of cultivators at the foot of the mountain heard it in their hearts. Declaring war on the sacred palace? Even if Ji Biechio died, his life would be worth it. Disperse. Qin Hao glanced at the foot of the mountain. There were so many people. His identity as Emperor Yuan was exposed today. He didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse for the Dao sect. However, it shouldn't be a big problem. Even if there was a problem, Qianning would have erased all traces in advance. After all, the Water Jade Holy Empire was still under the control of the Sacred Palace. We will take our leave. The huge crowd of cultivators bowed to the void and quickly left the Dao Mountain. In fact, they really wanted to pay their respects to Li Chuji's imperial demeanor, but Ji Biechou's roar was too serious. The Dao Mountain was facing the Sacred Palace's crusade at any time. It was better to leave as soon as possible. Among them, two relatively large forces were particularly conspicuous, so much so that it was difficult for Qin Hao to not notice them. Did I say that I would let the three of you go? As Qin Hao's voice fell calmly, the Taisui Emperor, striking Kong Dao Emperor, and old ancestor striking Kong immediately turned around and lay down in midair again. Senior, I didn't do anything. Everything has nothing to do with me, the Taisui Emperor said. The Taisui Emperor said. Li Chu-san was still thinking about him even in this situation. Li Chu-san was too vengeful. Senior, I'm old and dim-sighted. I didn't know that Di Zun had arrived in Nanjiang City and did something foolish today. Please spare my lowly life for the sake of my younger sister, Nye Sippo. Old ancestor striking Kong knelt down and cried. Next to him, striking Kong Dao Emperor Nye didn't dare to say a word at all. Now, he finally understood the gap between the old ancestor and Li Chuji. Evenly matched? Slightly better? The old ancestor really had the face to say that. They were simply worlds apart, okay? From today onwards, I will preach on the Dao Mountain. I don't want to see the disciples of the Dao Mountain suffer any disturbance. Do you all understand? Qin Hao said. Understood, understood. The three nodded obediently. The Taisui Emperor said, From now on, there will be no more Taisui Mountain in Nanjiang. I will move away. Same. The striking Kong sect should have ceased to exist long ago. I'm too tired to be burdened by Nye, this unfilial descendant. I will go back and disband the striking Kong sect. Old ancestor striking Kong said. Nye stared at him, but there was nothing wrong with it. Since the Dao Mountain had an emperor preaching, its status was different from before. From now on, the Qilin Dao sect would become a first-rate force. Moreover, with Li Chuji's tyrannical cultivation, he would definitely promote the Dao sect to become a top first-rate force, second only to the Sacred Palace. According to the past rules, once a sect in a certain region was promoted to a first-rate force, the other second-rate forces would merge with it. While expanding the scale, it would also make it easier for the Sacred Palace to rule. The Taisui Emperor was already thankful that Li Chuji didn't make the three of them elders of the Dao sect. Chapter 1691. The battle for the inheritance was over. Li Chuji transformed into the Tribulation Sword Emperor and crushed the great ancestor Li Kong. After that, Nye Sippo of the Sacred Palace personally came to the Mountain of the Way. She still couldn't stand the power of the Tribulation Sword Emperor and knelt before him. Qin Hao guarded the world with his own strength and protected the Taoist orthodoxy that had lasted for thousands of years. From that day on, Li Chuji's name was like the sun in the sky in Nanjiang. The aristocratic families of the 15 counties of Nanjiang, the officials, and even countless heroes from farther places rushed to the Mountain of the Way with their children. They wanted to join the Taoist sect to cultivate. The Sword Emperor taught the way at the Mountain of the Way. Its status naturally rose along with Qin Hao's. Who wouldn't want to join the Mountain of the Way? At present, Nanjiang City was overcrowded. There were countless martial artists seeking the way, but they didn't enter the Mountain of the Way directly. Instead, they stayed in the city and waited for the situation to improve before deciding to send their children to join the Taoist sect. The Tribulation Sword Emperor was too strong and ignored the authority of the Sacred Palace. The higher-ups would definitely send someone to deal with him. In fact, everyone knew that the sacred palace couldn't use force to negotiate. After all, Li Chuji's cultivation was at the 7th level of the imperial path. Using force wouldn't benefit either side. But there was a process to this. The Qilin Mountain. After the twists and turns, the Taoist sect regained its peace. Like before, the disciples returned to the outer sect to cultivate, discuss martial arts, and live. Days passed. It was ordinary and quiet as if nothing had happened. But there was something different. The herb garden had become the most sacred place in the hearts of the disciples. Now, its status was even higher than the main peak. No one dared to overstep their boundaries. They only felt respect and endless gratitude, because the Tribulation Sword Emperor was in the herb garden. Qin Hao and his disciples lived peacefully. Unless the Sword Emperor summoned them, no one in the Taoist sect dared to disturb them, including the 3 sect leaders. At this moment, in the sky above the herb garden, endless light fell. A majestic Emperor Qi surged in the light. The sword will of the great path was everywhere. Qin Hao sat in the air with his eyes closed. His silver hair fluttered in the wind. Strands of light of the great path continued to cleanse his body. The sword will in his body grew stronger and stronger. The entire Qilin mountain range emitted terrifying sword hums. It was extremely solemn and dignified. The elders, deacons, and disciples of the Taoist palaces, the Sword Valley, the Spiritual Tower, the Martial Pavilion, and the Weapon Workshop all looked over at the silver-haired Sword Emperor who was sitting in the air. Their eyes were filled with passion and respect. The Sword Emperor is about to break through to the 8th stage of Tao confirming. His will of Renhuang wandered around the edge of the herb garden, feeling the power of the imperial swordsmanship. After today, the Calamity Sword Emperor was only 1 level away from the Emperor realm. Although I can't understand what kind of halo our ancestors were bathed in when the Tao sect was at its peak, I think that it's not much different from our current feelings. Shi Yongnian clasped his hands behind his back and looked at Qin Hao with a sincere gaze. He also cultivated in the way of the sword and could feel the vastness and terror of the sword will in the herb garden. I'm just afraid that he won't stay here for long. Bo Shang let out a long breath. The appearance of Li Chuji had brought the Tao sect's supreme glory and made everyone faintly feel like they had gone back in time to the strongest era of the Tao sect. However, how long could this glory last? The South Sky Peak flew to the Calamity Sword Emperor out of nowhere and took the peak for himself. However, he changed his name to Li Chuji and quietly watched over the herb garden for the Tao sect. There must be a reason. Zhang Bieqiu, Shi Yongnian, and Bo Shang didn't ask. They could feel that Qin Hao had some connection with the Tao sect. At the same time, they knew that he couldn't stay on the Tao mountain forever. Perhaps he would suddenly disappear one day, just like when the Calamity Sword Emperor appeared. If that day really came, they wouldn't ask him to stay. They would only wish him well. They hoped that the name of the Calamity Sword Emperor would fly higher and higher until it spread throughout the 5 realms of the East Continent. The Tao sect would always remember that there was once an elder in the herb garden named Li Chuji. Buzz. An incomparably intense brilliance fell from the void. It was as bright as a pillar and enveloped Qin Hao's imperial body. At this moment, the blood in his body surged and the will of the Tao roared. The surging and terrible demonic flames spread out again and covered the herb garden. Huge flaming meteorites roared and revolved around him. Along with this, the towering southern heaven giant peak in the distance also let out a loud roar. It seemed to have become shorter invisibly. The giant peak sank and the spiritual qi that covered the sky and earth surged, all of it entering the sea of fire in the herb garden. In an instant, Qin Hao's spiritual soul grew stronger, and the Emperor's will and rules that he exuded surged. Below his body, the 7 Fists Emperor's path halos flashed with an extreme platinum luster. A dragon's roar resounded through the heavens and earth, and the 8th Emperor's ring appeared. It grew stronger and stronger until it solidified and resonated with the other 7. The 8th tier of the Tao realm. It was done. Congratulations, Master. Congratulations, Sword Emperor. Congratulations, Sword Emperor. In the herb garden, Shi Dong and Yin Qingqing's blood boiled. In the various dojos of the Tao Mountain, all the elders were excited. It was an honor to witness the Emperor's path. Phew! Qin Hao exhaled a wisp of white air and smiled. Then, he dispersed the will of the Tao. The flames in the void and the sword's roar disappeared at the same time. Everything on the Tao Mountain returned to normal. In 8 years, he had gone from the 4th stage to the 8th stage of the path validation realm. Perhaps to ordinary people, this speed was terrifying, but to Qin Hao, these 8 years had been extremely difficult. Looking at the Tao Palace, Qin Hao slowly said, Chu Biechio, Shi Yongyan, Bo Shang, Elder Yu, and Elder Qi, come here. It had been 8 years. They had watched Shi Dong grow up and his bloodline revert to its ancestor. Moreover, he had gained the Emperor's path and the undead law. As long as there were no accidents, this child would be able to support the Tao Mountain in the future and lead the Qilin Tao sect to great height. Therefore, it was time for Qin Hao to leave. His task of guarding the Tao sect had been completed, and his eldest senior brother's wish had been fulfilled. As for the future of the Tao sect, that was Shi Dong's responsibility. He couldn't guard it forever. Greetings, Sword Emperor. Inside the herb garden, Qin Hao sat on the ground with Shi Dong and Yin Qingqing beside him. At this moment, Chu Biechio and the others arrived and bowed. There's no need to be so formal. Just find a place to sit, Qin Hao said. As usual, he didn't put on any airs. Everyone smiled. Li Chuji was still Li Chuji. However, it was impossible for them to not be formal. After all, in front of them was an 8th stage Sword Emperor. Sword Emperor, why did you summon us? No one dared to sit in front of Qin Hao. Chu Biechio took half a step forward and asked in a low voice. The others also looked very nervous. They faintly guessed that the Sword Emperor might be leaving. Qin Hao glanced at everyone. Seeing their nervous expressions, he thought of his 8 years of life in the Tao sect. Some things were really difficult to say. I know you have questions in your hearts. You want to know why I entered the Tao sect under the alias of Li Chuji. Qin Hao paused. Seeing that everyone was even more nervous, he continued. In fact, it's not a secret. I don't have any purpose in joining the Tao sect. However, it doesn't matter to you whether you know or not. It's better to let it all stay in the beautiful memories. In short, the Tribulation Sword Emperor received help from others. Chapter 1692. Yes. Qin Hao nodded slightly. Ji Biechio's body trembled, and a simple yes was heard. Everyone felt sad at the same time. Sure enough, he still had to leave Taoism. Shi Dong suddenly felt empty, as if a piece of his soul had been taken away. He clenched his fists tightly, as if he could grasp something, but in the end, he slowly loosened his fists. He could not let himself be his master's shackle. The path of Tribulation Sword Emperor was broader than the sky of Nanjiang City. In the future, don't let little Dong practice swordsmanship. He is not good at it, and his bloodline power is in a mess. You should focus on his talent and try to teach him Taoism techniques, so that he can understand the essence of it. Qin Hao instructed. In the tomb, Shi Dong fought Lu Guang and Dui Tianchong. It was the first time he used the power of his soul, and it was completely based on his feelings. He did not control his power well, and many of his attacks were full of loopholes. Not to mention the huge consumption of his soul power, the effect was not ideal. Sword cultivators were extremely murderous. Eastern Sky's soul power was destined to not reach the great Tao realm, so he should play to his strengths and avoid his weaknesses, and strengthen his power of Taoism technique. The great Tao Milky Way was ever-changing, and the illusion of Taoism techniques could be used to the fullest. Shi Dong had mastered the essence, and once he fought, the enemy would not be able to resist. The battle followed his rhythm from beginning to end. In contrast, Shi Lang's sword seal had the murderous power of sword Tao. "We will remember," Shi Yongyan said. Shi Yongyan said. From now on, they would earnestly listen to every instruction of the sword Dharch and execute it firmly. In addition, Shi Zhenhua. Qin Hao paused and looked at Elder Qi. "That bastard has been removed from his position as an elder of the Sword Valley and transferred to the back of the mountain to guard the tomb. He can never preach again. If Biechio and the others did not stop me, I would have killed this bastard." Elder Qi was so angry that his face turned red. He really expected better from Shi Dong. "Guarding the tomb, that's good." Qin Hao did not interfere. He could see that Elder Qi was fierce, but he could not kill him. After all, Shi Dong was his grandson. Moreover, Shi Zhenhua was indeed thinking for Taoism from a certain point of view. His nature had not reached the point of incorrigible. Since he was a descendant of the Shi clan, even if he did not belong to Shi Mu's lineage, he did not deserve to die. Let's see if he can wake up in the future. In addition, Taisui Mountain and Void Striking Sect migrated overnight several days ago. Both of them disappeared without a trace. Bo Shang secretly sent people to keep an eye on them. The Taisui Emperor and Old Ancestor Striking Kong ran pretty fast. "You want to run after making me unhappy? It's not that simple. Don't worry, they will come back obediently," Qin Hao said. He had already predicted the fate of the three sects in the future. Under the general situation, Old Taoist Strike Kong and the Taisui Emperor had no choice but to flee. Everyone laughed and guessed that the Sword Dharch had other plans. They couldn't help but worry for Patriarch Strike Kong. "Oh right, Elder Yu." Qin Hao stood up and raised a hand to stroke Yin Qingqing's head. "Qingqing, this girl, although her talent isn't good and she has a carefree personality, she's actually very meticulous. She can understand even the slightest detail. You're getting old and you need an obedient child. After I leave, Qingqing will learn alchemy from you." "Okay." Elder Yu glanced at Yin Qingqing. The ancestors of the Yin clan lived at the foot of the mountain, and generations of them respected the Taoist sect. Yin Qingqing's foundation and talent were indeed not up to expectations, but since the Sword Dharch took a liking to her and took her as his disciple, she must have something extraordinary. "Master, you don't want me anymore." At this moment, Yin Qingqing failed to live up to expectations and shed tears. Her comprehension and physique were indeed not good. How good could her bloodline be when she was born in a poor family of hunters? However, her master had never despised her. He allowed her to brag and complain all day long. "Elder Yu, you're more blessed than me. Master's path is too hard." Qin Hao sighed. When he took Yin Qingqing into the herb garden from the outer sect, he saw that she was optimistic, sunny, and pure. It seemed that no setback could defeat her. It was precisely this kind of spirit that was rare in the martial arts world. "Okay, since you're happier with Elder Yu, I won't pester you anymore. In the future, when I'm not here, you have to take good care of yourself. Then I really can't bear to leave you." Yin Qingqing choked with sobs and opened her arms to hug Qin Hao's waist. She was like a cat that couldn't bear to let go of its master. Qin Hao didn't resist this time. After 8 years in the herb garden, he had watched his 2 disciples grow up. They could be considered half his children. He sighed deeply. If he was only the Tribulation Sword Sovereign in this life, he would be very happy to stay in the herb garden. Unfortunately, he had a more important mission to complete. "Remember to take good care of your junior brother." But Yin Qingqing let go. "Shi Dong is stronger than me now. He should take care of me in the future." Master, don't worry. I'll take good care of senior sister." Shi Dong followed closely. "Ha ha ha. Everyone laughed. These two little guys. The sword sovereign took in this pair of clowns. It turned out that life in the herb garden was so interesting. Compared to the various dojos of the Dao sects, it seemed a little less humane. Senior, are you leaving today? Why don't you stay for a few more days? Shi Dong is growing rapidly. His martial arts needs more guidance from you. Also, Jean Bietio hesitated. There was a hint of worry in his tone. The Holy Palace? Qin Hao said. Don't worry, before leaving the Dao sects, I will take care of everything. Calculating the time, Qianning should be here soon. Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Even though the Tribulation Sword Emperor's cultivation level was high, it was still too direct for him to call out the name of Imperial Master Shui Yao's direct disciple. Could it be that they knew each other? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Rays of light shuttled through the distant void. The platinum aura that ran through the sky was so eye-catching. There were more than one of them. Many emperors had arrived in groups, heading straight for the Qilin Dao mountain. In an instant, the overwhelming pressure of an emperor swept across the 15 counties of Nanjiang. Countless cultivators and common people bowed to the ground in fear. These auras were no stranger to them. Being under the rule of Empress Shui Yao, how could they not recognize that these were from the Holy Palace? Finally, the will of the Holy Palace descended on the Dao Mountain. On this day, the 15 counties of Nanjiang were once again in an uproar. Speaking of which, I'm here. A trace of joy flashed in Qin Hao's eyes as he looked at the large number of platinum auras in the void. Jean Bietio and the others suddenly became extremely nervous. There was more than one Emperor Yuan from the Holy Palace here. There were actually 7 or 8 of them. Moreover, there were even Renhuangs accompanying them. Could it be that they were going to use force again? As they spoke, powerful auras quickly descended, and they accurately landed in the Dao Mountain herb garden. After all, Qin Hao's aura was too familiar to Qianning. He was the #1 person in the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace. He was an existence that she couldn't afford to offend or forget. Qin, I didn't expect it to really be you. Emperor silhouettes descended one after another. Jean Bietio and the others felt their knees go soft and their scalps go numb. The person in the lead was the most favored eldest disciple of Empress Shui Yao. She was also the future supreme ruler of the Shui Yao Empire, Holy Maiden Qianning. It turns out that they really know each other. Bo Shang's head shook violently, and he had the urge to faint. Qianning walked directly towards Qin Hao. She was also very surprised. However, this was the southern land of the East continent. Denda's name was taboo, but Qin Hao had the same name as him. Even if they were far away from the eastern land of Daqin, calling out his name would still cause some panic. Qianning understood why Qin Hao changed his name to Li Chuji. How have you been? Miss Rushuang, you are actually with Qianning. Qin Hao stepped forward and was about to greet them when he suddenly saw a face like cream behind Qianning. She was the daughter of Yan Laobei, the Array Emperor of Beijiang's Array Formation Guild. The two were very familiar with each other, but they met in the East continent. At this moment, Qin Hao's expression unconsciously turned solemn. He almost instinctively felt that something big was going to happen. Chu-san, my father is missing. I have been looking for him for almost 10 years. As soon as she saw Qin Hao, face like cream burst into tears. Chapter 1693. In the Taoist herb garden, Qianning, the first saintess of the Shui Yao Holy Kingdom, came with a group of people. Face like cream, the daughter of Emperor Yen of the Northern Border Matrix Guild, came with the group. Friends reunited and cried as soon as they saw each other. Emperor Yen had disappeared. Qin Hao was quite surprised when he heard the news. His expression became serious as he said, "Follow me inside to talk. The rest of you stay." Then, He walked into the room. There were too many people around. Qin Hao didn't want to expose his Xianyang background in the East Continent. Qian Ning and Face Like Cream followed without hesitation. After entering the room, Qian Ning set up a barrier. "Uncle Yen, what happened?" Qin Hao sat down and pointed to the chair beside him. The two sat down together. Face Like Cream wiped the tears from her face with a handkerchief. She calmed herself down and said, "I don't know the details. It started after your wedding." When they escaped from the Divine Palace safely, Qin Hao led 300 people from the Divine Palace to destroy the Xianyuan family in the Southern Territory. Then, he killed Emperor Yen and Emperor Fu in the northern border. He married Xiao Han successfully and held a grand wedding. More than 100 emperors attended, including more than a dozen imperial lords. During the wedding, Muri used an imperial illusion matrix to make the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace appear. It was short-lived and shocked the cultivators of the 3 territories. It was unprecedented and would not happen again in the future. At the wedding, as the leader of the Northern Border Matrix Guild and a close friend of Xiao Yi, Face Like Cream was naturally present. But before that, Yen Laobei had disappeared. On the wedding day there were many guests and emperors. Qin Hao couldn't take care of them all. Face Like Cream was also in a bad mood. She didn't go up to Qin Hao and Xiao Han to propose a toast. She drank alone in an inconspicuous corner. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Qin Hao said. Senior Yen had helped him before. Moreover, he still had the title of Honorary Elder of the Array Formation Association. It was reasonable to say that if Face Like Cream asked, he would definitely not ignore it. "It wasn't easy for you and little sister Xiao Han to be together. You're a newlywed, so how could I ruin your mood?" Face Like Cream said. Alas. Qin Hao sighed. No wonder Array Emperor Yen was not present on the day of the wedding. As the leader of the northern borderline, Yen Laobei should not have been absent due to his relationship with his father-in-law. He did not expect this to be the reason. 10 years ago? Qin Hao raised his eyebrows slightly. He was very sensitive about this timing, because it happened to be the time when everyone escaped from the Divine Palace. Yen Laobei's disappearance also happened during this time. Was it a coincidence? In the beginning, I didn't pay much attention to it. My father was like that. He often disappeared for no reason, and the time he spent with me was very short. But every year, on the anniversary of my mother's death, he would come early to pay his respects. No matter where he was, no matter how busy he would never miss this day. In the first year, the purple evil flower disappeared from my mother's grave. I knew then that my father did not come. At that time, I thought that he was too busy and had forgotten about my mother's death anniversary. But in the second year, the third year, until now, the purple evil flower has not appeared. It was my mother's favorite flower when she was alive. That's when I realized the severity of the situation. Since 6 years ago, I have been searching everywhere for him. Until today, I still can't find him. Yen Rushuang couldn't help but shed tears when she spoke of her emotions. Her mother died early, and she had never met her birth mother. She and Yen Laobei depended on each other for survival. Array Emperor Yen was her only support. As the daughter of an emperor, Face Like Cream naturally did not lack anything since she was born. But this did not mean that her life was better than others. She even envied other people's families. Especially on New Year's Day, she yearned for the atmosphere of a commoner's home. To her, being a member was a luxury. In the past, she always felt that Yen Laobei was not good. She was already used to her father disappearing without a trace. But in the past 10 years, she realized that she could not leave her incompetent father. He was so important. My people told me that they found traces of my father in the East Continent. I rushed over and used Qian Ning's power to try to find him. But in the end, the senior who was proficient in array skills was not my father. In the past 10 years, Face Like Cream was very anxious and muddle-headed. Although the Array Formation Association was a powerful force in the northern borderline, it was not much in the East Continent. Luckily, they had a good relationship with the Water Jade Holy Empire. That was why they had the opportunity to meet Qian Ning. With Qian Ning's status, she did not need to appear. She was not the only holy lady in the Holy Palace. She could have arranged for someone else. After all, her status was the highest. Perhaps this was fate. Qian Ning and Yen Rushuang met by chance, and the two felt like old friends at first sight. They chatted happily, and Qian Ning could empathize with Yen Rushuang's feelings. Thus, she began to help Yen Rushuang with all her might. The Water Jade Holy Empire spread out and searched everywhere, slowly expanding into the 5 realms. Although it took a lot of effort, the Water Jade Holy Empire's power was limited. Within the 5 realms, there were many overlords and monarch lords. There were many forbidden places that even the holy palaces dared not enter. I am very happy to be able to help a friend. Unfortunately, I did not help much, Qian Ning said. Qian Ning said. She was lonely in the sacred palace. She was not as noble as people thought. No matter what, I have to thank you. Qian Ning, it is worth it to have a sister like you in this life. Face Like Cream and Qian Ning looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Cough, cough. Sorry to disturb you. There is still me. If you need anything, just let me know. I, Qin Hao, will not refuse. In front of 2 old friends, Qin Hao did not hide his name. By the way, you found the right person to look for. He is stronger than me. There are many places in the 5 domains that I cannot go. Qin Hao can go easily. You may not know this, but there is no one in the 5 domains that he does not know. Qian Ning still remembered the 300 disciples of the Divine Palace. In fact, there were more than 300 disciples who escaped from the Divine Palace. There were more than 500 of them. Some of them might have died in the inland sea, but there was definitely a small number of them who were still alive. At the very least, Qin Hao held a wisp of the divine souls of 300 powerful heirs. With one order, the 5 domains of the East Continent would follow Qin Hao. Really? Qian Ning looked at Qin Hao as if she saw a ray of hope. Cough, cough. I was originally planning to leave the Dao sect, but I will still be in the East Continent. Don't worry. I will immediately activate my power and tell my disciples about Uncle Yan's appearance and abilities. If there is any similarity, they will report it to me immediately. Since Qian Ning needed it, Qin Hao was naturally duty-bound. After all, when the 300 disciples returned from the Divine Palace, they would probably be idle at home. He would arrange something for them to do and not waste their lives. Qin Hao, thank you. You are my saviors. Face Like Cream grabbed Qin Hao's hand excitedly. She was very touched. Don't be like this. I am married. Qin Hao retracted his hand and smiled awkwardly. Qian Ning rolled her eyes at him. You didn't even inform me that you were going to marry Xiao Han. Otherwise, my master and I would have personally attended the wedding. Otherwise, senior sister. Oh right, where is senior sister? Why didn't you tell me that you were coming to the Dao sect? Only Muri and Qin Hao were left in the Migres Hall. According to the old ancestor's temper, she should be inseparable from Qin Hao. Why was Qin Hao the only one left? Qin Hao's face suddenly darkened. He said in a heavy tone, "It's a long story. However, I can solve it myself. As for the Dao sect, I came to see the descendants of Eastern Sky's senior brother and brother Shermu. I want to see if anyone bullied them. Oh, don't be nervous. The matter with Granny Nya is in the past. I won't hold a grudge." Hiss. Qian Ning sucked in a cold breath.